Jeez. Happy Mushoku Mondays, everybody. Welcome back to yet another trek through Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series. We're on volume 19, chapter 8, and I have read up to chapter 10. Things happened. A lot of things happened. Got a nasty fake out, and yes, while Orsted makes donuts, Pax makes pancakes, or at least we have pancakes Pax. Anyways, we'll get into that when we get into that, but welcome back to the premiere. Thanks, chat, for dropping by for the premiere. Greatly appreciate you guys' support, your kind words, all the ways that you guys support me. It means a lot to me. And yes, greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel monetarily through Patreon, tips, links, super thanks, all that good stuff. I forgot to bring up my list. We had Joshua with a super, we had Noah with a super, Beto with a membership, Kusha with a super, Roy's Moist with a super. I think that's everybody. If I missed somebody, I apologize. Greatly appreciate you guys' support. It means so much to me. And yes, with all that said, let's just dive into it, because I'm hoping I can get through all three of these chapters because they go well together, but at the same time, it's a lot to cover, so we'll see how it goes. But chapter 8, An Urgent Message, and Zenoba's True Feelings. This was interesting. It was one of those moments where it's like, okay, yeah, I kind of assumed that there was something else in there, and it kind of implies something that I thought was kind of fascinating. So that's, again, probably going to be something that's going to make this difficult to do 3 chapters. But anyways, 10 days passed since the Battle of Fort Karan. I keep saying Karan. Karan. In that time, Zenoba proposed a ceasefire with the enemy, using the hostage as a bargaining chip. Rudius didn't know the details, but it sounded like the war could be over soon. They also sent a messenger to the capital of Sharon to inform them of victory and efforts for a truce. Zenoba had proceeded with peace talks without waiting for orders from the king, but Sharon was in no condition to fight out a drawn-out war, so it was hard to imagine opposition. The man wasn't stupid after all. Yeah, I was kind of curious about that. That was, at this point, I started kind of considering the possibility that he might anger Pax by doing that, or it might be one of those things of like, no, why the hell would you do that? I want them dead. I want to destroy them. Keep going. Go further. And I figured it was going to turn to Pax literally sending them into an offense after all this, but again, it doesn't go that direction. Although it felt a little worrisome that they didn't hear back immediately, even after more than a week, the fort echoed a passionate commentary of their victory. Roxy and Rudius left a big impression with their spells, while Zenoba's bold performance on the front line was just as talked about. Some of the troops were still riding the adrenaline high, either because of the battle or the handled sneak attacks. The soldiers were warming up to Rudius a bit. They were polite before, but their faces were clammed up. These days, he was getting actual smiles, even a bit of cheerful small talk. No one gave him a hard time about the soldiers he had killed accidentally with his magic. That kind of hurts because, yes, I think that would be even more painful to kind of experience, is not only the fact that you in your own head is grieving over the fact that you've done that, but at the same time, you're also seeing people are upset about that, and it just kind of compounds on it. Between that regular counseling session with Roxy and Zenoba cheering him up, Rudius managed to pull himself together emotionally. At this point, he could look back on his actions without viewing them as crimes or mistakes. I think that's good. He's got a nice kind of support group that's kind of surrounding him and keeping him kind of talked up. It does kind of make me wish that there was a little bit more discussion about this situation, and it almost feels like it's kind of throwing it to the wayside and moving forward, kind of just giving a rough idea of what he's going through. Like, it could be a little bit better to get a little more into his mind, having those sessions actually play out in the novels, which kind of seems like a loss. Like, it's a missed opportunity for them to really get into that mindset and what he's going through. But it is what it is. He honestly beat himself up about it way too much. This was not a peaceful world in general, and he was a direct subordinate of Orsted. To protect his family, he'd picked a fight with a vicious god. He must have known this day would come. At some level, he must have accepted that, even if half-heartedly. I do like that, though. It does kind of correct itself in actually getting into that concept there. Like, I chose to do this. I knew this wasn't going to be an easy fight. This was going to be a rough road. But again, it does kind of play into that idea that I said that then, and I told myself I accepted it, and I feel like I did accept that, but it's a different thing to actually, you know, get into it. Even so, he felt pretty sure that he wouldn't sign up for any more wars after this one. No matter who tried to you're flagging it, Rudius. You're totally flagging it. No matter who tried to recruit him. War was like a whole different world, and he preferred the world that he actually lived in. He wasn't going to kill anyone unless he absolutely had to. He wanted to stick with his old policy on that one after all. It kind of goes back to what he said earlier, the idea of, I have to get rid of this mindset that I have from the old world. No, I kind of like that one. I kind of like that idea of not killing. For one thing, all this anguish about it after the fact was exhausting. Taking lives wasn't worth a week-long nervous breakdown. That, I guess, is a simple way of putting that, not necessarily what you did. Trying to put it all behind him, Ruiz stayed on alert for signs of dangers for 10 days since the battle. His mana capacity had fully replenished at this point, so he was at peak condition. He also had version 1 magic armor close at hand, and he wasn't going to get careless. It was hard to imagine the Death God coming for them now. The possibility that the Man God wasn't actually pulling strings here got more plausible by the day. Maybe it was like Orsted said. Maybe these events had taken place in another timeline, when the diary didn't mention it. Zenoba might have dealt with the problem without Ruiz's help. Or maybe he wasn't summoned in the first place. Not that that was a waste of time, Zenoba's life was in serious danger. But the war was over now, in any case. It only just starts. There was no more enemy armies lurking in Chiron's borders. Surely that accomplishment would be enough to satisfy Zenoba's sense of duty. No, he was planning on staying. I called that one. Now they just had to talk to him into returning home, as Ruiz wasn't about to leave him under Pax's thumb. Ruiz had no proof the Man God wasn't up to something, but given that he'd left him alone for this long, the odds that he'd laid a trap for them were low. Thanks to that assuring thought, Ruiz got a good night's sleep for once. After waking, he took a stroll to wash his face at a nearby river. A small group of soldiers were there as well, washing their faces and brushing their teeth. Hey, it's Rudius. Good morning, sir. Thanks for keeping watch again last night. You know, I just assumed that huge metal suit was just some toy for Prince Zenoba or something. That technically is what they said that it was when it was traveling. Quite the impressive magical implement. Surrounded by soldiers, Ruiz had become more popular all of a sudden. Daily barrages of flattery sure took some getting used to. Again, I think that's kind of the thing that's helping him too, which is a good thing. They were all wearing clothes for off-duty, and it seemed the women didn't wear bras, as the archer that hugged him the previous day was visibly perky. A lovely start to the day. He's catching a little glimpse.
Oh, I was wondering what this crowd was about. Good morning, Master Rudius.
Zenoba strolled up, wearing the same casual clothes as the others. Thanks to his height and oddly skinny limbs, he looked like an unwashed neat. Despite his appearance, the soldiers dropped to their knees at the sight of him.
Prince Zenoba, there's no need for that. Go on, get back to your washing up.
But, Your Highness.
At the moment, I'm a drowsy soldier like the rest of you, and surely you don't expect me to act all high and mighty in this outfit.
Zenoba had been absurdly busy lately. Apparently, there was 1,000 tasks that needed to be done after a large-scale battle. Although the fallen were left on the battlefield, a group of tough-looking customers showed up within a day to strip them of their equipment and burn the bodies. I was kind of wondering about that, like how they handle that, because again, if the mana hits them, whatever, they can become undead. It seems there were people who lived off the battlefield. Yeah, that's typically always the case. Sort of professional versions of peasants who hunted down deserting samurai for cash. Zenoba and Rudius knelt down to splash their faces in the water. So what's going on with the negotiations? You think they're going to sign off on the truce? Rudius chose to start with a light jab, rather than jumping to persuasion. Once the truce was signed, there'd be no reason for Zenoba to hang around Chiron.
They will. We received a provisionary reply just the other day. In fact, while no official decision has been made, all indications are that they will soon accept a truce. There should be no further incursions for, at least the next 3 years.
Several soldiers nearby murmured in excitement. The tidbit about 3 years was interesting, given the way that he had phrased the sentence. Zenoba thought the Kingdom of Vista hadn't fully abandoned hopes for conquering Chiron, despite their crushing defeat. Well, yeah, again, he said that they've been waiting for a long time. It kind of makes you assume there's some sort of resources there they want, or they want to get away from that region. Again, assuming this is close to the conflict zone or near that, maybe they want to get out of that area. It is kind of interesting because I don't think that that's a very lush environment that Chiron is in, so there's got to be some sort of resources or something that's there they want. Reese assumed they would dismiss most of their current command structure, which meant they would have to find new generals that were competent. Replenishing their forces would take some time as well, and they would have to find some halfway plausible excuse to breaking the truce that they signed. At bare minimum, it would take 3 years to sort it all out, though it may be far longer than that before they were ready to make another move. And I was kind of assuming, well, okay, then that gives Chiron plenty of time to get structured back up.
That would be time for our purpose, however. Given 3 years of peace, I'm sure the kingdom will grow strong and stable once again.
You think King Pax can pull that off, though?
I don't doubt it for a moment.
Zenoba gave a firm, confident nod. While Rudius wasn't sure where his certainty came from, maybe there was some plans in works. One way or another, it sounded like the war was over. That sure didn't take long. Good to hear. Hope they can sign off soon, so he can get started.
Indeed.
Zenoba had happiness on his face, but a bit of melancholy too. That was understandable. He wouldn't have much role to play once it was peaceful. Hey, Zenoba, what are you planning to do next, once the war's over? It was another light jab, but came out sounding ominous. Hopefully Zenoba didn't have plans to propose marriage to a sweetheart and flag his death.
I suppose I'll return to the capital to receive new orders from His Majesty, first of all, although he might also opt to keep me posted at this fort for now.
You mean you're staying here? In Chiron?
Well, yes, naturally.
See, I knew it. I knew it. What he stated in the previous chapter, I'm like, I knew it. It was a reply that Rudius was expecting, but it almost seemed like the thought of returning to Shariah was never in his mind. The magic armor hadn't been fully perfected yet. The automated doll was stalled halfway through, and their figurine production by Julie was now beginning to come together. Would he regret leaving all those unfinished? Of course he would. He was passionate about all of them. Look, Zenoba.
Yes, Master Rudius?
Once the truce gets signed, how about you come back to Shariah with me? Let's keep making figurines together. It sounded like a proposal. And Rudius didn't even buy a bouquet first. Though it really was a proposal. Rudius was asking Zenoba to choose him over his homeland. Zenoba looked at him with no expression. All emotion drained from him as water dripped from his face. It was hard to believe he was smiling a moment earlier. Rudius was convinced he was going to get shot down, and he messed up. It does kind of hurt. It does kind of hurt. Because again, Rudius' mindset here was to bring him back after this was done. Okay, we just have to go there. I have to protect him. Once that finishes, we can come back home. Everybody's expecting me to get him back home. And right here, he's literally realizing, I have to say goodbye now. Like, everybody has said goodbye. I now have to say goodbye to my friend here. I mean, it's not like I'm asking you to abandon your kingdom or anything. Just, huh? Suddenly, a commotion came from the fort. A loud sound of hooves hitting the earth. It was no cavalry stationed at Fort Caron. So who could it be? Looking back to the fort, there was a single rider turning the corner and heading their way.
A messenger from the capital, perhaps? I expect they carry a letter from Pax regarding our negotiations.
So what's the plan if he tells you to stay out here and fighting until the enemy's completely crushed?
Ah, now there's a question. I suppose it may be possible if you were kind enough to accompany us.
Now we're already talking about, yes, pressing forward. As the horse grew closer, Rudius recognized the rider. Ginger? She had desperation on her face. Spotting Rudius and Zenoba, she spurred their direction. As the nearby soldiers formed a protective wall around Zenoba, he shouted,
"That is my personal guard. Make way at once."
Ginger's face flashed relief as the troop stepped aside. As Zenoba strode forward to meet her, she slipped out of her saddle and tumbled to the ground.
"Ginger, what happened? Speak to me."
Zenoba lifted her off the ground into his arms. She was in clear distress, and her breath sounded harsh and labored. She had no external injuries, but her face was clouded with exhaustion, probably due to riding at top speed for days without rest. That poor girl. She finally found what she was looking for. So this answers what I'll talk about. And again, my prediction was the idea that there was the King Dragon Realm was implanting themselves in the village or in the capital, so that once Pax did what he did, he could take over afterwards. So the idea there was that they weren't giving Pax the throne. They were setting up so that he can destroy it from the inside so they can take over. But I was wrong. It could actually be, yes, that the man god was working with somebody else to take over. An uprising in Latakia, Your Highness. Jade, the former general, rose in the name of the 11th Prince. His army has surrounded the royal palace. After barely gasping out her message, Ginger promptly fell unconscious.
The 11th Prince? But there's only 10 of us. What's the meaning of this? Ginger, explain yourself. You must explain at once.
Calm down, Zenoba. She obviously needs some rest. After stopping Zenoba from shaking Ginger frantically, they brought her to a room inside the fort to recover. The 11th Prince was a boy named Haruha Sharon. It's a really interesting name. Haruha? Haruha, it sounds Japanese, but I guess it could be European or something. I don't know. He was a child, 3 years of age, sired by the former king, Palton Sharon, quite late in life. His mother came from a farming family, a lineage that would have disqualified her completely as a potential royal consort. For that reason, Haruha's existence was never made publicly acknowledged, officially finding employment with a provincial lord. His mother was granted an isolated mansion in a distant corner of the kingdom in which to raise her son in secrecy. Precious few within the kingdom even knew of Haruha's existence. That was the king himself, the minister who procured the mansion, and General Jade, who happened to be the brother of Haruha's mother. 2 of these men died in Pax's bloody purge, but General Jade did not. Jade had sworn an oath of undying loyalty to the former king, despite his humble origins. Palton recognized the man's uncommon talents and raised him steadily through the ranks to his position. And that position allowed Jade to lift his family from a life of grinding poverty into one of comfort and indulgence. Jade owed the king everything, and his gratitude was great. So great, the king's eye settled on his younger sister. He offered her up willingly. Yeah, it's one of those things like his admiration for him as well as his appreciation for him. It's like it wouldn't be a question in that regard, that loyalty that he has. At the time of Pax's coup d'etat, Jade had been stationed at Fort Caron. The fort garrison numbered nearly 1,000 back then. Jade took half that number and rushed back to Latakia. But by the time he arrived, it was too late. He learned the king was already dead, along with the rest of the royal family. There were around 2,000 soldiers stationed at the capital, now under the command of Pax. Jade's own army, now 1,500 strong, swelled by the troops of local lords who had sent reinforcements along the way. They were outnumbered, but given Jade's great skills as a commander, they could potentially have triumphed. But in the end, Jade opted not to fight. The reason was simple. His own army, now internally divided into a pair of rival factions. Half was allies, wanting to drag Pax off the throne. The other half wanted to recognize him as king. Watching the nobles squabble viciously with one another, Jade realized he had no real hope for victory. He surrendered without a fight, and swore his allegiance to the new king of Ch8-10. That had to suck. That had to suck a lot. Again, how much he admired the previous king, and this guy just killed him. I mean, again, a lot of people in the kingdom probably felt that same thing. I now have to swear my oath to this guy that destroyed this person I admired and swore my loyalty to. There was, of course, more to this decision than met the eye. Jade had learned about the fact that his sister's child, the 11th prince, Haruha Ch8-10, was still alive. He would wait patiently for the right moment. He would bide his time. And in the end, he would avenge the king's death in the name of his nephew. This was the true oath he swore that day. In the weeks that followed, Jade made his arrangements quietly. He sought out those that resented Pax's rule and unified them under a secret alliance. He searched for the 11th prince, he made the necessary bargains with the local lords, and before long, he raised an entire rebel army, ready and eager to strike at his command. That's gotta be dangerous, the idea that you have to look for allies, and yes, any moment he can find somebody that seems like they're not liking Pax and get turned in. And it could be an aspect of somebody not liking Pax, but still turning them in because they just fear Pax. Especially because he has the Death God next to him. Victory was now a real possibility. And then, the perfect opportunity presented itself. Vista's army were preparing to invade, and Pax began to send his troops to garrison the northern fortress against this threat. Thanks to Jade's departure and the chaos of the coup d'etat, Ch8-10's military had been severely weakened, and the King Dragon realm wasn't sending reinforcements. In all likelihood, this war would not go well. Once the enemy pushed past Fort Karan, the most defensible of Ch8-10's border forts, Pax would have little choice but to use his trump card and send the Death God to the north. And with Brandolph gone, even a small force could succeed in murdering the king. I kind of wonder about that. I don't think that was going to happen. Because, yes, they would get word the fort had fallen, but sending the Death God out there into the middle of a battlefield to take on a large army, yes, he's going to be able to kill a lot of them, but get them all before they can get past? That's the question mark. And again, I don't think even if the fort failed, I think he would just wait for them to come there and then have the Death God fight. I think he would turtle in, just like he's doing right now. He'd turtling in. Jade had failed to account for one crucial factor: the sudden return of the third prince, Zenoba Ch8-10. His appearance on the scene was shocking enough, but he also brought along former court magician Roxy Magurdia and a mage named Radius Greyrat, said to have failed both the North Emperor Auber and the water god Rada in battle. Perhaps Jade had considered reaching out to Zenoba on the chance he'd return to take revenge on Pax. But Zenoba showed every sign of loyalty to his brother and set to defend Fort Karan on his orders. Jade's plans soon careened off course. Ch8-10 beat back the invaders at Fort Karan in a historic victory, and the Death God stayed at Pax's side. Now here's the interesting thing, because it's a two-sided thing where on one end it's actually a good thing, but on the other end it's a bad thing. Because he was expecting the Death God to leave, and then they can come in and just take out Pax really easily. But on that note, if the Death God had to leave to the fort and defend the nation from the invading army, what happens there? There's a possibility, once they take down Pax, they then, with a now even more weakened force, would have to protect the kingdom from an invading force. But here, since Zenoba went and protected them, he doesn't have to worry about the war afterwards, but he has to worry about the Death God. It's funny. The army of Ch8-10 were currently weakened, but would recover in due time, and there was a good chance Pax might recall the forces he'd moved north to the area around the capital. In particular, if Prince Zenoba, Roxy Magurdia, and this Rudius returned, any attack would be doomed to failure. Jade's window of opportunity was closing fast, and so, for lack of any other option, he launched his uprising. Gathering his rebel troops, he seized the capital in one lightning-fast strike and besieged the royal castle. This was Ginger's outline of the incident, which she gave when she woke up. She snuck out of the gates when the rebellion began and rushed to Zenoba. When I fled the capital, it seemed like the king was holed up in the palace with a small force of defenders, but I can't say where things stand at this point. The royal palace was a solidly defensible position, but days had passed since they were surrounded. Pax might very well be dead in his castle, occupied by rebels. But why hole up inside its walls? He had the Death God Randolph Mariane. They could have broken through the enemy and fled. There was too many questions, so they should move carefully and...
I see. Let us head to the capital at once, then.
Zenoba spoke casually and rose to his feet. Ginger seemed relieved by his pronouncement, but then froze in shock at his next words.
If His Majesty has escaped, we can bring him back to the fort for his protection. If he is unable to flee, we can enter the castle through a secret passage known only to the royal family and escort him out to safety.
But wait, Your Highness. Ginger pushed herself up in desperation, grabbing Zenova's sleeve. He smiled over at her, reassuringly.
We'll be quite all right on our own, Ginger, I assure you. Stay here and rest up while we're gone.
Do you truly mean to take King Pax's side on this? Ginger's tone was of utter disbelief, but Zenova quirked one eyebrow quizzically.
Naturally. Who is this 11th prince to me? I've never seen the boy's face, and I've heard nothing of his birth until now. I'm somewhat skeptical that he's even my father's son.
He had a point. It was possible that Jade just loathed Pax for other reasons, and fabricated this new prince to serve as a puppet. Assuming the king really had been intimate with his sister, it would be easy to make up a convincing story. It's actually a very interesting way to kind of twist that. Yeah, what proof do we have? There was 3 people that knew, and 2 of them are dead, and now the one that is still alive is leading the rebellion. Like, who's to believe that? And yes, again, somebody that's supposed to be that person's sibling doesn't even know, but it hurts coming into why she's so upset. So you intend to come to King Pax's aid, rescuing him from the palace? And then do what, exactly?
Our course of action will be a matter for His Majesty to decide. But if he orders me to defeat the rebel army, I suppose that will be my next priority.
You can't mean that, Your Highness. Why would you go so far to help that vile creature? Zenoba's eyebrow twitched at that. There was anger on his face now.
Did you call our king a creature, Ginger? Is that truly what I heard you say?
I'm aware that I overstepped my bounds. But Prince Zenova, please, have you forgotten what Prince Pax did to me?
What on earth are you talking about?
He took my family hostage, Prince Zenova. Zenoba's eyebrow twitched again. Ruiz had almost forgotten about that ugly detail himself. It had been many years, but you can understand why that memory stayed fresh for Ginger. She suffered under Pax's cruelty directly, and such memories stayed with you forever. Ruiz assumed Lilia and Aisha would back her up right now, if they were here. What sort of king coerces the obedience of their personal guard by threatening their families? Why lift a finger to keep him on this throne? That hurts, honestly, because yes, it technically means that the person that she's sworn loyalty to is now supporting the person that literally took her family, her children, hostage, kept them from her, threatening them to serve him, and her having to sit there and watch all the horrible things he was doing in the course of that time. It sucks that she has that conflict there. Edo-era shogun built a whole system around that concept. Too bad Ginger hadn't been around to choose them out. Though the royal family's personal guards were a big deal in this kingdom. The more knights a prince had, the higher they moved in order of succession. The guards probably took pride in their vaunted positions.
Well, Ginger, I have a question of my own. Why do you protect a prince such as Zenova Sharon?
What do you mean?
I sold you to my brother, as you may recall. Hardly the deed of a worthy prince, or one deserving of protection. Why do you serve me nonetheless?
A reasonable point. It was Zenova who put Ginger at Pax's mercy in the first place. He'd literally traded her for a figurine of Roxy. Why was she so damn loyal to him anyways? Right. She made a promise to his mother. Though, she didn't bring that up, as it may not help her case about who was a crappier boss. Yeah, that would be more of the idea of, because of this person, I am serving you. It doesn't make an argument for the idea of which of these two things are worse. Because her saying, please serve him, doesn't change the fact that he's a crappy boss. Well, I know that you're far wiser than you let on.
Pax is quite a clever man in his own right, wouldn't you say?
Perhaps clever, but not wise. She said the same thing I said. She said the same thing I said. He's not intelligent and brilliant, he's just clever. He's not wise because he screws up still. You can pull off these crazy stuff by being clever, but you're going to fail because you're not wise. He gives no thought to the consequences of his actions, only the pleasure they may bring him in the moment. It's behavior of a fool.
And I'm a fool who devoted my life to dolls and figurines. It seems Pax and I are much the same.
That's not true. You're a blessed child, Prince Zenova. To reveal that you possess both strength and wisdom would have a target put on your back. You played a fool to avoid your rival's notice. I'm certain of it. This is where it gets into it. This is where it gets into it. I was afraid of this. I'm like, no, don't go that route. Don't go that route. I like how they presented this so far because, yes, it's technically gone the route that I was talking about where Refugin totally could go the route where Suddenly out of nowhere, Zenoba suddenly straightens up and says, I've been fooling you all along. I'm actually extremely intelligent. I'm not an idiot. I was acting a fool, and I've set all this stuff up for you, Rudius, and it's over now. I made you let your guard down. But I guess what it's done so well with this whole scenario is, yes, prove that Zenoba is actually a very brilliant man. He's just weird. He's just quirky, and he just functions differently. But in the end, with all this happening, you're not seeing him act weird or think oddly. He's thinking very straight. It's like before he was just quirky and he had this obsession and he thought differently and he acted irrationally. And again, not like most people would kind of consider as normal thought processes. But the moment they got here, suddenly he is focused and he's brilliant and he hasn't slipped up or made decisions that seem off and awkward. So this is kind of technically proving that this is his true self. And yes, he could have been hiding his true nature. It's very interesting. So it kind of is doing what I was saying earlier, but it's not doing it in a dumb way. It's pushing you in there rather casually and cleverly. Zenoba said some oddly profound things from time to time. He deciphered that bizarre ancient writing they found on the automaton's core. He even made a magic armor for Rudius. Since returning to Sharon, he proved himself a quick-witted commander. There was plenty of reasons to believe Ginger was onto something here. That said, his obsession was clearly genuine. There was no way to fake that kind of passion. If anything, Rudius guessed that he wasn't that interested in showing off his intelligence in front of people. I kind of follow Rudius's mindset here more, that it's not an aspect of him tricking people, it's just that he's not really interested in showing that off. It makes sense, because why would he rush off and go to the university and train in magic? He had a passion for that, so he was doing that with his own right mind. It's just that he didn't care to get involved with anything else. He didn't care for the throne, so he's not going to show off his intelligence there. He doesn't care about this and that and this and that. The only reason that he's back here is because, yes, he feels like he was able to do that. And as we find out here in a minute, there seems to be also an aspect of his brother, which we have indicated before, so it is technically consistent with his character. It's super cool stuff. I love it. I love Zenoba.
I have no need to play a fool, Ginger. I'm the very definition of one. All I want from life is to drown myself in my absurd interests.
In that case, let's go back to the magic city of Shariam immediately. You could devote the rest of your life to your passions there.
I'm afraid that's not an option. A puppet like myself can only move as directed.
I don't understand. Ginger looked back at Rudius. The message in her eyes was clear enough. Say something to him. You know I'm right about this. Rudius agreed that Pax had done some unforgivable things. He captured Lilia and Aisha, trapped them, and tried to turn Roxy into a personal slave. Rudius seen him punch Lilia in the face, and he kept his cool at the time, but it sure as hell pissed him off, thinking about it now. Yeah, that's interesting, because if I remember correctly, back then he wasn't, like, flying off the handle. Again, that was a different Rudius back then. That was a Rudius that still wasn't really connected to his family in this new life. But yeah, now, if Pax were to do that now, he would fly off the handle. Listen, Zenoba, I don't like this plan either.
Oh?
Maybe Pax did change a little during his time in the King Dragon Realm, but that doesn't mean that he's someone worth risking your life for. Zenoba's face turned to Rudius, pouting irritably.
I hardly expected this from you, Master Rudius. As I have explained before, my life is the property of this kingdom. And of course, this kingdom is its king, with his life in danger.
Do you remember what you told me before we left, Zenoba? It's my duty to protect Sharon against her enemies. That is the reason I'm alive, and was permitted to indulge myself for all these years. That sound right to you? Zenoba didn't reply. Rudius had memorized every word perfectly. Again, this was the argument that I was really trying to make before, was like, for me, is in that quote is really the idea of, and Pax attacked it. Why would you protect him? He attacked this place that you said that you're supposed to protect. Why would you protect him? Why would you care if it was Pax or this 11th prince sitting on that throne? Your job is to protect Sharon from invasion, not to sort out all of its ugly power struggles. Once that truce is signed, the war with Bista will be over. Seems to me like you did your duty perfectly.
Master Rudius, please.
That's actually a good point that he's making there, actually. Again, protect Sharon, not what's going on in Sharon. But again, if he's already stated that the kingdom is the king, it doesn't really work there. Can't you call it a day for now? Maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but the trip over here isn't exactly grueling. You could go right back to your normal life in Sharia, and pop in whenever it seems like war will break out. Zenoba brought his hand to his chin, looked to the ceiling, and after a moment of contemplation, looked back to Rudius.
It's quite an appealing idea, I must admit, but I can't accept.
Okay, but why not? It was getting harder for Rudius to keep his cool, but he had to try. Shouting at someone was the last way that you'd ever get them to change their mind. Rudeus knew that he had flaws in his reasoning, of course. The kingdom of Ch8-10 wasn't likely to let Zenoba wander off because his job was done for now. And if he kept popping up out of nowhere to take command at the last possible moment, it would cause headaches and complications. I can kind of agree with that. It's not like he's going to be able to just kind of zip back and forth. His arguments were flimsy, but Zenoba could still use them as excuses to go home with them to the place where he was happiest. Here, Zenoba, here's your excuse. Just use it. Just use it. Can you at least give me an explanation, Zenoba?
I'm not entirely sure I understand myself.
Rudeus struggled to keep calm again. He had to stay patient. There was something that was making him stubborn. He had to keep poking to get at it eventually. Listen, Zenoba, you do understand Pax must be terrified of you, right?
Terrified of me? Why?
I mean, he killed the rest of your family, remember? And you're a blessed child. Zenoba bore no grudge. But Pax had plenty of reasons to feel guilty about his actions. King in that position tend to get paranoid. I agree. He's going to have that stain in the back of his mind constantly. Who's going to kill me over that? I did something terrible. I am in control now, but who wants me dead? If you show up at the palace to help him escape, he could easily assume that you were there to kill him. You might end up getting murdered by the death god on the spot. The same thing could happen later on. You could save his life a dozen times, and I still don't think Pax will trust you. Eventually, he'll find some convenient excuse to have you killed. It makes no damn sense for you to stay with him. Zenoba said nothing, face impassive and unreadable. You told me that if the kingdom wants you to die, then you'll accept that. And I can understand why you'd be willing to die in battle, okay? It's your duty. It's the reason they let you live. But why would you let Pax murder you? Out of paranoia. What good would that do for Ch8-10? Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly what I was really getting to with my point, is if your whole reason to be alive is to protect the kingdom, why put yourself in a position where you can't do that anymore? So it at least gives Zenoba an opening that just leave for now. Let them handle that. Don't put yourself in a position that's going to lead you to your death. Zenoba closed his eyes and drew a slow breath as if digesting the words. He exhaled before opening his eyes halfway.
Despite it all, he's still my little brother and the only family I have left.
Zenoba's pulling the brother card. Is going to hit me. Zenoba pulling the brother card. There it is. And again, this is consistent. He did the same thing with Julie. Out of nowhere. Again, we have the news that he did this. He killed his little brother, one of the actual, like, legitimate queen's son. He killed him. They got angry, but they just, like, banished his mother and everything. And then over here, they get Julie, and suddenly he wants to name her after his brother. And that was that indication. I think at the time he said, the brother that I killed or something like that. He was regretting it. He felt bad that he did that. That was that sign that he actually cares about his siblings. He cares about his family. Again, he's focused on other things, and that gives you the indication he doesn't care about anything. But he does technically care about family, which really sucks with the later chapter. I'm going to cry. I know I'm going to cry. Even though I hate Pax. Even though I hate Pax. Anyways, that knocked the wind out of Rudeus' sails. The man was fighting dirty now, and there was nothing to say to that. Seemingly unaware that he had already won the argument, Zenoba continued.
Perhaps it sounds absurd, coming from a man who's never spoken of such things before. But Pax is my brother, Master Rudeus.
Damn it, dude. Zenoba's face went blank. None of his usual theatrics, laughter, shouting, or pompous... It sucks because I know it's coming up. Damn it, Andrew. Or pompous posturing. Zenoba's merely staring at Rudeus, or maybe through him. Calm down, Andrew. Rudeus let out an audible sigh. Introducing his family to the argument kneecapped Rudeus' opposition altogether. Zenoba's stubbornness suddenly seemed understandable. Rudeus suddenly found himself wondering what he would do in his shoes. If Aisha murdered Norn, or vice versa, he'd obviously be furious. It was hard to see himself forgiving that. But what if he barely knew one of them? Or maybe both? And what if she was trying to move forward and accomplish something meaningful, despite her mistakes and crimes? He'd give her a piece of his mind, but he'd probably try to help her. Yep. All right, Zenoba. Zenoba had no intentions of returning to Shirai with them. Rudeus finally understood that now. He didn't know how honest he was being, but even if he was manipulating him, he used the word family to do so. That was the strongest weapon that could be used in an argument against Rudeus.
Family. Family.
He made the decision, and clearly wasn't going to bend. Ruius apologized to everyone back at home for being unable to drag Zenoba back. The only thing that he could do now was support Zenoba until he could somewhat gain Pax's trust. To be honest, I was planning on bringing you back home with me, even if it meant groveling in the dirt and blubbering. But since you put it that way, I guess I'll stick around just a little longer.
My sincerest thanks, Master Rudius, and I'm glad it didn't come to that. The sight of your tears would certainly have weakened my resolve.
Damn, maybe I should have started off with that.
Spare me, please.
For the first time in a while, Zenoba and Rudius grinned at each other in amusement. Cliff could probably understand once the story was explained. As for Julie, well, he could always ask her what she wanted to do, and bring her safely to Zenoba if she chose to join him. The reserved figurine plan would have to be scrapped. That was rough, considering they got Pedagus's permission, secured Ariel's help, and put Aisha to work finding employees. It did hurt to know years of preparation amounted to nothing, honestly. Still, Ruius wouldn't complain. He couldn't. Not if Zenoba was doing it for his family. There's another side of that. Yes, it sucks the idea that he was building up to this project for the reserved figurines, but I would argue that everything that he has done for that process has been beneficial to him. And the idea that he has saved Julie, brought Julie into their home, and protected her, and gave her new purpose and a new life. Even if Zenoba goes off and she could probably continue to making figurines. She has enriched somebody's life, and he has received enrichment from that. Even despite the fact that the whole project itself has failed, he has enriched lives doing what he was doing. And yes, technically, through trying to work with Pedagus, he gained his favor. That was a huge, massive benefit to him in the end. Again, even if he doesn't sell them, he has gained a powerful ally in that process. He wasn't exactly on good terms with Pax at the moment, but that was something that could change over time. They could apologize for the past and find a way to forgive each other. Slowly, bit by bit, building a relationship of trust and respect. Their mistakes could be corrected. Ruius didn't like Pax one bit, but he was capable of changing. He proved that much already. Anybody could change. Another application there. No, you can't be serious. Ginger's face was pale with horror. It was understandable. She hadn't been there for the audience with Pax. In her mind, he was the same prince from years ago. A vicious, petty little bastard. I'm sorry, Ginger. Zenoba made his feelings pretty clear, and I think I have to respect that at this point. It was hard to imagine Pax maintaining his hold on the throne for long, but they'd have to see what they could do. The first step was obvious enough. Plus, there was some room for optimism. When Zenoba showed up to rescue him, maybe Pax would reconsider his mistrust.
I believe that concludes our conversation, Ginger. My apologies for everything I've put you through.
Zenoba gently pat his loyal bodyguard's shoulder before slipping past her to the door. Your Highness, wait, please. Half falling off the bed, Ginger grabbed Zenoba by the leg. She made no move to release him, and there was desperation in her eyes. I understand there's no stopping you, Prince Zenoba, but at least allow me to make one small request of you.
What request would that be?
Don't die. Even if King Pax orders you to do so. Please, just don't die. Her choice of words were clumsy. She probably hadn't thought this through beforehand. Still, her meaning was plain enough. At the end of the day, all she wanted was Zenoba to stay alive.
That seems potentially unreasonable.
You have my word on that, Ginger. I'll make sure Zenoba survives this, no matter what. Ruius cut off Zenoba and accepted her request on his behalf. He understood Zenoba felt that he owed Pax his loyalty, but his death wouldn't help either of them. If their relationship fell apart, and there was no salvaging the situation, Ruius would drag Zenoba back to safety himself. That was the job that he originally came here to do. He wasn't going to let himself lose sight of that, no matter what. Thank you so much, Sir Rudius. You have my sincerest gratitude. Ginger bowed her head deeply and said no more. I feel bad for Ginger. Again, there's so much conflict there that she's going through because of what Pax has done to her. And it sucks. And again, it goes back to the idea of change. This whole thing is about change. This whole segment is about change. Chapter 9, to Pax's side. Oof. They used the magic armor to transport to the capital. A carriage would be time-consuming, and riding on Ruius' shoulders would be too rough. So they employed the bed of a wagon, put stabilizers with earth magic to reduce risk of tipping, and Ruius pulled it from behind to arrive at the capital in 5 days. In the suit of armor running. Efforts to improve the ride didn't work out well, as Zenoba was puking everywhere, and Roxy had her hands clamped over her mouth. But it still worked. Ruius wasn't sure how much mana he had left, as his body felt sluggish, but at least he didn't have to use it in combat. So hopefully, he wasn't drained too badly. Their mission was to rescue Pax. In theory, the Death God would be at his side this time, but it may not play out that way. So Ruius wouldn't let his guard down. Yeah, that's the crazy thing there, because considering, again, this magic armor consumes a lot of energy, and here he is literally rushing the capital But because he didn't fight, it didn't deplete too much. And I imagine if he actually did have to fight, it would deplete much quicker. Latakio was tightly sealed. The gates were closed, barred, and guarded by rebel army. There was a crowd surrounding it, both bewildered and anxious to being locked out. There was merchants, adventurers, mercenaries. Ruiz even spotted soldiers in uniform camped nearby, probably from nearby cities or on patrol when the rebellion took place.
I suppose they don't want anyone interfering until they've settled things decisively.
Well, I guess that means Pax is still alive at least. Roughly 10 days have passed since the rebellion seized the city. From the look of things, the royal palace was holding out against the siege. It wasn't clear how badly Pax was outnumbered, but he was hanging in there. It probably didn't hurt that he had one of the 7 great powers at his side. Yeah, that kind of pulled people off. Plus, it gives a lot of emphasis on how the actual palace is structured. Ruiz and party approached the city cautiously, making sure no one got a good look at them. There would probably be a commotion if Zenoba was recognized as a prince. They would probably catch the attention of Jade's soldiers. Jade had already identified them as an ally of Pax, so it was best to remain undetected. They considered a frontal assault, but ultimately decided against it. Zenoba then directed Rudius to a hidden path at the riverbank. It wasn't far from the city walls, and felt peaceful. As they rounded a slight turn in the river, a watermill came into view. Rudius deactivated his magic armor and stepped out. They came to a building that supposedly had a hidden passage, but after Rudius seen Zenoba's pale face, he suggested a break first. However, Zenoba noted urgency of the situation and pressed them on. There was no way of knowing what was waiting them. This little mill may be the last safe spot for them to take a breather, and sadly the passage may not accommodate the bulk of the magic armor, so Rudius wanted to prepare for anything. Taking a break would allow him to regenerate a fraction of his mana. Plus, Roxy and Zenoba need to recuperate from a miserable wagon ride. Slow down and think about this, Zenoba. We should really catch our breath before we charge in there. You and Roxy both look terrible right now, and I can use a bit more mana in my tank. Haste makes waste, as the saying goes. After a moment, Zenoba nodded reluctantly.
I'm not familiar with that expression, but very well.
Ruiz breathed a sigh of relief. Last thing he needed was a charge in there with eyelids drooping. Before that, I think we ought to make sure that the passage is really there. Yeah, good idea. Inside the building, they found stacks of wooden boxes and barrels. After Zenoba moved them out of the way, they tapped to the floor and the walls. Eventually, they found a plate door of some sort with no handles.
This must be it.
Well, let's not jump to conclusions. Might be a basement storage room or something. It was odd that it had no handles, but if it was an escape route, it may not be intended for people to open it from the outside. That technically makes sense. If it's an escape route, they don't want people going the other direction. All right, Zenoba, can you pry this open? Zenoba ripped the thing out with brute force, revealing a ladder leading down a dark hole. Illuminating the bottom of the shaft with fire magic, it was about 4 meters deep. A hole in one wall pointed in the direction of the capital. After dropping down and looking inside, Roxy called out, "What do you think? This is it, all right. Excellent. Now climb back up here and let's get some rest." Sounds good. After a 3-hour nap, Ruiz fetched his magic armor version 2 from the wagon. There was no chance to fit the version 1. Version 2 was highly effective in its own right, though, unless he happened to fight someone on the level of the 7 great powers. Flag, 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 flag. Given that the death god Randolph was almost certainly waiting for them at the end of this passage, Ruiz couldn't help but feel a little anxious. That said, bringing Mark 1 would probably require blasting through the palace walls. He wasn't shy about causing property damage, but Zenoba didn't approve of this idea.
It's like, no, you can't destroy things.
I wondered if he'd be able to do that, because yes, it has magic resistant bricks. I'd be very curious if he could actually bust through that with, like, physical strength. It would make sense that you probably could. The secret passage was so narrow that 2 people found it difficult to walk side by side. There was no light whatsoever, so Lamplight Spirit illuminated their way. Zenoba took the lead, Ruiz behind him, and Roxy taking the rear. It's quite a tight squeeze, brings back some unpleasant memories. Ruiz thought about how to comfort her, but drew a blank. Right. That was the last words anyone spoke for quite some time. After what felt like an hour, a door came into view. It was a simple metal plate, similar to the one at the mill before. There was also a knob or a handle. Once again, Zenoba wedged his fingertips into a tiny gap between the plate and the wall, violently ripping it out.
Oh, my goodness.
Trying to step through the doorway, Zenoba let out a strange little grunt and stopped in his tracks. Peering past him, Ruiz could see a passage was packed solid with earth or sand. They hit a dead end. With no fork in the path, it meant
either the passage collapsed in an earthquake, or General Jade knew about it and sealed it off well ahead of time.
Those were the most plausible possibilities. There was a chance that Pax had done this himself during the coup. In any case, this is a major reason why he hadn't tried to escape. Yeah, I wonder about that at this point. After reading the last 2 chapters, and the next 2 chapters, like, I kind of wonder if it could have been Pax that had it done before to kind of close them in. It could have been done during this time by Pax in order to, I guess, keep people from getting in there because he had no desire to leave. Or it could be somebody that, yes, it could be Jade to prevent them from escaping. And it could very well have been, yes, the man god putting something into play to force him not to stay in there and lose his mind.
Master Rudius, do you think you can get rid of this dirt for us somehow?
Well, I'll give it a shot. Switching places with Zenoba, Rias got to work. He was pretty comfortable with working with earth and sand at this point. He was the one that dug out the nice basement under Orsted's office after all. The approach was to compress the dirt under intense pressure, while simultaneously hardening sections of the wall and ceiling. It was a bit like building a big rock pipe, one segment at a time. The results was somewhat rushed, but it was stable enough to get them through. After an hour of steady work, the wall of earth ahead crumbled on its own. Another hour of walking followed, bringing a total of 4 hours in that tunnel. Zenoba didn't spend much time on his feet, and was starting to look worn out. Thankfully, they reached the exit. Initially, they found themselves in what looked like a basement. They stumbled out of the door that was hidden in the room's far wall. It was a chamber with well-built stone ceiling and walls, maybe 10 square meters in size. The walls were largely featureless, except for some candle fixtures. A staircase in the corner spiraled upwards. It didn't take long for Rias to realize that they were in the royal palace of Sharon. The chamber happened to be an old apartment of his. This actually makes me kind of wonder, why didn't Zenoba spot this? If there was an escape chamber there, or escape wall or door, why didn't Zenoba find that? Because again, I don't know if it was the same in the light novel, I kind of forget, but I remember even with the anime, you have like Zenoba crittering around the walls trying to find the way of turning off the barrier, where he was looking for the crystal that was feeding it. So why didn't he spot that? That's kind of weird. Unless he knew about it and he knew that wasn't the way to turn off the barrier. Zenoba, isn't this?
Indeed. The very room in which we first met each other.
He made it sound romantic, but this was a place that Rias was held captive. The room seemed weirdly empty this time, but it apparently had a purpose as an emergency exit. That would explain why it was set up with a powerful magical booby trap, but the circle for that barrier seemed to be gone. Interesting.
Ah, what a pleasant memory. On that day, when I met the artisan who created that wonderful figurine, I was positive my life had reached its high point. Who could have known that even happier days lay?
Let's save the nostalgia trip for later, please. Rias cut off his attempt at narrating some strange documentary and headed up the stairs. They then proceeded cautiously into the hallway. Castle was quiet, and darkness lay outside its windows as the sun had set. Not a single light illuminated the halls, and Rias assumed the maids were gone. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. It made Rias wonder where Pax's troops were. Any idea where Pax might be?
I would expect to find him in Father's room.
Zenoba led them down the hallway, clearly knowing the place like the back of his hand. Still, he didn't seem sentimental about it. His eyes were fixed firmly on the path ahead. Oh! Roxy came to a sudden halt. She stopped in front of a specific room. You notice something, Roxy? No, not really. I just realized this used to be my room. The door was swung open, but nobody was inside. There was little furniture except for an ordinary desk and bed. It looked like its occupants left in a hurry not too long ago. The bed was a rumpled mess, and a jumble of personal items were spread across the floor and the desk. Someone else must have been living there at some point after Roxy left. It looked more like an apartment than a hotel room. But even though it was clearly someone else's space now, the thought of Roxy once living there made Rudius feel oddly sentimental. This was a place that Roxy was staying while Rudius tutored Edis.
Master Rudius, Miss Roxy, is something the matter?
Nah, not really. Roxy just spotted her old room and got a little nostalgic, that's all.
What happened to saving that for later? Good grief.
Zenoba walked back to join them, looked a bit exasperated. He glanced at the room, hummed, then turned to Roxy.
The room you stayed at is the next door over, actually.
Again, sign that Zenoba pays attention to what's going on. He's like, yeah, that's not your room. Huh? Visibly flustered, Roxy rushed over the next room, threw the door open. After comparing it, she looked up and down the hallway before blushing fiercely. It was too dark for me to tell, I guess. Curse you, Zenoba, Rias thought. You'll pay for this. No one embarrasses my precious, perfect Roxy like that.
Master Rudius, why are you stepping on my foot?
Oh, sorry. This carpet is a little slippery, you know?
I am quite aware of your love and admiration for Miss Roxy, but would it truly be right for her to reminisce over the wrong room?
He had a good point, so Rias decided to hold off any further foot stomping. That aside, Rias liked getting a glimpse into Roxy's past like this. If it weren't for the teleportation incident, this place would probably end up being her home. Yeah, I do kind of appreciate that. It's so rare that we actually get some insight into the characters' backstories and backlife anymore, at least the wives. So it's always nice to get a little bit of glimpse into what happened back then, which does kind of lead into a massive oof moment here soon, but wait. But yeah, I'm assuming the whole idea of like the stuff being clear there's obvious that whoever was staying in that room had to get the hell out quickly. The rebellion happened and they had to rush out. There was a side of me that was almost thinking that it was going to be like Pax was having his new bride and his wife stay in there, or they're doing some happy time in there to kind of again replace Roxy in that room. Like Pax has the desire to play out a fantasy that he was going in there with Roxy, and anyways, let's just keep moving, please. Continuing onward, they didn't end up running into anyone in the palace, and it wasn't clear why.
Now, The formal entrance hall of this palace is actually located on the second story, meaning any guest from the outside enter that floor. The third floor is largely devoted to more practical functions, such as...
Zenoba was very chatty the whole way, for whatever reason, perhaps to fill the silence. The first floor was mostly living quarters for troops and servants. The second floor held the entrance hall, throne room, and various waiting chambers. The third floor contained offices and conference rooms where domestic administrative matters were attended to, as well as a passage to the castle's ramparts and the main defense tower. The fourth floor was where the prince and princesses resided. Their personal guards also made their quarters there. Finally, the fifth floor was where the king's chambers were. No one was on the first three floors. In the fourth floor, Reese glanced outside the window. There was bonfires burning all around the palace. Clearly the rebel army had it closely surrounded. Still, there was no sign of Pax's own forces. It sure didn't look like there was any fighting going on. And the ramparts seemed empty. It seemed the whole castle was deserted. Zenoba seemed to have picked up on these ominous signs as well. After reaching the fourth floor, his chatting came to a halt, and his face grew tight with tension. Something strange was happening in this palace. By the time they reached the final flight of stairs, you could almost feel it in the air. Reaching the fifth floor, the equivalent to the castle's keep, they found the most valuable room in all of Sharon in both monetary and symbolic terms, the king's own bedchambers. A single man waited for them at the door, the death god, Randolph Mariane. For some reason, he sat in a chair, casually leaning forward like a man taking a break, elbows on his knees, hands folded together, head tilted to one side. One uncovered eye and his pallid skull of a face was staring right at the direction. I don't get it. I really don't. Why would the king build his bedroom all the way up here anyways? Seems ridiculous to me. Just makes his own life worse, really. Isn't it a nuisance? Going down all those stairs every time he has to do his duties? Isn't his food always a little cold by the time it reaches him from the kitchens on the first floor? Isn't it sure to be a struggle just to make it up here once he starts to get old and frail? Isn't he ensuring he will burn to death if this building ever catches fire? Randolph cocked his gaunt head as he muttered through these thoughts. Gazing steadily in their direction, his body language was like that of an exhausted middle-aged office worker. Yet, a chill ran down Maurice's spine. I can just see this hallway, and he just sits there in that little chair, and he's just staring at him, and it's dark, it's creepy. Now, I would have built my chambers right down the first floor. Attending my duties would be easier. My food would reach me piping hot, and I could emerge whenever I pleased. But I suppose that's the logic of a commoner, isn't it? He giggled shrilly to himself as he babbled on. Somehow the man's face looked even more skull-like when he was smiling. Roxy swallowed audibly at the sight. To be fair, this spot does have its advantages. It's an ideal place to hole up if you find yourself under siege like this. They used plenty of magic-resistant bricks when they made this place, after all. No need to worry about any long-range spells, and every floor has strong defensive choke points, so it would pose a challenge for anyone to storm their way up here. They built this place for war, to be certain. What was Randolph getting at? He was just sitting there. Maybe they could walk right past him? To tell the truth, Ruiz didn't want to take the single step closer.
Sir Randolph.
Zenoba stepped forward, but Randolph didn't even straighten up, much less rise from his seat. But he did favor Zenoba with an unsettling smile that seemed creepier at night. Good evening to you, Prince Zenoba. What brings you all the way out here?
Something odd appears to be taking place in this castle. Do you know anything about the situation?
Why, naturally. It's my doing, after all. Randolph reached up and lifted his eye patch. Beneath it, his eye glowed with an ominous red light, a star-like symbol clearly visible at its center. It was a demon eye, without a shadow of a doubt. Now, this definitely does technically imply the idea that that blockade could have been him. On the orders of His Majesty, I made use of my Eye of Severance to produce a makeshift wall around the palace. Thanks to its power, I have kept the enemy army at bay. And that makes me think that it's creating a wall, and it could be unintentional. He created a wall that literally goes down as well as up, which is really cool. Reese hadn't heard of that one before. Ors had never even mentioned it. Honestly, his boss was always leaving out the most important details. Still, if Randolph was wearing an eye patch, it probably meant that he couldn't control it well.
I see. What are the others?
All slain or fled, regrettably.
And where is His Majesty?
Within his chambers.
Ah, good. My thanks, Randolph. You've done well to keep him safe.
Zenoba stepped forward, trying to make his way past Randolph to the door. Abruptly, unfolding his hands, Randolph reached out to bar his way.
Why do you block my path?
His Majesty ordered me to allow no entrance.
But I have urgent business with him.
However urgent it might be, I'm afraid His Majesty is terribly busy at the moment.
I must ask you to step aside, Randolph. I came here to rescue His Majesty, and that's what I tend to do.
That's quite thoughtful of you, but he evidently has no intention of leaving this palace.
Irritation on Zenoba's face was growing by the second. Ruiz felt like Randolph was being suspiciously vague right now. I already knew what this... By the way, I already knew what the hell he was doing. I totally knew what he was doing by this point. Yeah, they shake in that bed.
I would hear this from His Majesty's own mouth.
As Zenoba moved to push his way to the door, Randolph rose to his feet. It was a slow, subtle motion. It almost seemed like his gaunt face floated into the air, carrying the rest of him with it. Now, let's all take a few breaths. King Pax is rather anguished at the moment, you see. He needs a little space.
Anguished? Why?
These rooms offer an excellent view of the city around the castle. You can see the hostile soldiers within his own walls, glaring his way with hatred in their eyes, and the soldiers gathered beyond, who simply watch and wait, making no move to save him. Randolph's gaze moved beyond them for a moment. Following his gaze, Ruiz could see a massive window on the landing, offering a panoramic view of Latakia and her surroundings. The rebel army was camped around the palace, but you could also see crowds and campfires clustered around the city's sealed-off walls. From up here, it did look like a huge army was sitting out there with no interest in attacking the rebels. Still, a majority of those people were simply merchants, adventurers, and travelers. I kind of wondered why he was bringing that up. He put a lot of emphasis on how many people were kind of crowded out there, which, I mean, makes sense. You're going to see that when you walk up, but still, they would never storm the city walls. Until His Majesty comes to term with these events, I won't move from this spot.
And how long will that take?
Zenoba asked through his gritting teeth. Ah, how I wish I had the answer to that question. I do expect it won't take much longer.
Enough of this. I have no time with your obstinacy.
Zenoba reached his breaking point. Reaching out for Randolph's shoulder to shove him, he was instantly sent tumbling back down the hallway. The momentum carried him all the way down the stairs behind Ruiz and Roxy. The back of his head slammed against the far wall, dislodging a sizable chunk of masonry. Dude strong. Dude strong. Was as expected. Again, one of the 7 great powers. And yes, mixed blood with some powerful beings. My sincerest apologies for the Hack 9 line, but you shall not pass, unless it's over my dead body. As he spoke, Randolph drew his sword from his waist, halfway from its sheath. The blade glowed a sickly shade of green, casting an eerie light into the darkness of the hallway. There was no doubt it was enchanted somehow. This was bad. Very bad. Reese didn't have his version 1, so they really shouldn't be fighting him. Calm down, Zenoba. Picking a fight with him is not a good idea right now.
But, Master Rudius...
Based on what he said, he was simply protecting Pax and following orders. Zenoba came here to help Pax. They had no reason to be enemies. Of course, that logic wouldn't apply if he was a disciple of the man god. But odds of that were very low. This was way too convoluted to be a trap to kill Rudius. If the objective was to murder Pax and prevent Chiron's transformation to a republic, the death god would have accomplished that long ago, like when Pax was staying in the King Dragon realm. Still, it couldn't hurt to ask just to be sure. Sir Randolph, we're willing to wait if you really think it's necessary, but I do have one question for you first. By all means, go right ahead. Does the name Man God mean anything to you? Randolph grinned at the question. It was a spine-chilling smile. Yes, I am familiar with that name. What of it, might I ask? With a harsh, rattling chuckle, he admitted it. They had a reason to fight now. Oh, I literally screamed at the text when I read this part. I'm like, what are you doing, Rudius? You're an idiot. Like, there's 2 aspects of this. I'm like, I already from this point foreseen that it was probably the case where he probably doesn't directly know the man god, Rudius. Him saying that he's familiar with the name, he's been around, what seems like he's been around for a long time. Even Bodygotti recognized the name. Like, or he didn't recognize the name, but I think he said that he's heard it kind of mentioned or whatever. But it's like, this is a term and a knowledge that has been around. Some people know who he is, and it's going to be basically through word of mouth of people that were directly involved with the man god. But it's like, that doesn't mean that he directly has it. Now, as we see here in a minute, I do obviously see that it's probably Geese indirectly to him, or possibly directly to him. As mentioned, I'm going to assume that Geese and Randolph probably know each other. They're probably like past friends or something like that. Because yes, Geese has been at the Demon Continent for a long time, and he probably met Randolph while he was out there. And I would imagine that he probably suggested to Randolph to go back to do cooking, because, you know, Geese was into cooking and whatnot. But yeah, I hated this. I'm like, not just the fact that I think right here, I'm like, that doesn't convince me that he's a disciple. He just that he heard the name. I'm familiar with the name. That's it. Not, yeah, me and him go way back, or yeah, I've been working with him or whatever. He openly admits I'm familiar with the name. Familiar with the name. But there's the other side of it, like, you need to go get prepared. Go, all right, cool, dude. Well, we'll be back, and leave. No, he stands there and gets all intense. It's like, God, you're an idiot, Rudius. This was an absolute what the hell Rudius moment. But knowing what we know now later, I don't think they would make it back in time. They had a reason to fight. Randolph was a disciple of the man god, acting on his order and furthering his schemes. No, that doesn't mean that. Rudius didn't know what the schemes were yet, but Randolph had caused the situation, and its outcome would work to the man god's benefit somehow. That made him an enemy Rudius had to defeat while he had the chance. He had to kill him, and it seemed Randolph could see it in his eyes. So it's come to this after all. What a pity. Randolph drew his sword, illuminating the hallway with its greenish glow. Zenoba took up his club in response, and Roxy raised her staff. And so, without further ado, it began. The battle against one of the 7 great powers. I think we could make it. Chapter 10. Wasted efforts all around. Yep. Dummy. This is one interesting thing is like, it's one of those chapter titles that literally applies to like multiple things here. Oh man. They stumbled their way into the battle with the Death God, and Rudius hadn't planned to fight him without Mark I, but it was too late to back out now. You can. Just run. Zenoba made the first move, rushing forward down the hall. They were facing one of the 7 most powerful fighters in the world, but he didn't seem to give a damn. With all the tactical sophistication of a wild boar, he sprinted straight at Randolph with his club. Goodness. The Death God neatly sidestepped the attack, which was expected. He couldn't shrug off Zenoba's attack if he landed one. It was going to be a bone-crushing crit. Problem is that he didn't stand much of a chance hitting Randolph. It was Rudius' job to change that. He had already summoned a quagmire where Randolph hopped to. Oh my. As his feet sunk, his body swayed. Ice Smash! Roxy fired off a well-timed offensive spell that the Death God deflected with a flick of his sword, but the motion left him more off balance than before. Zenoba's follow-up attack was already underway. With all the strength that held the immortal Demon King immobile, he swung his club with stone-shattering force. Despite his posture, the Death God managed to nimbly evade the second blow, but it was plain for all to see that he couldn't counterattack. He was on his rear, soles of his feet in the air, sword pointed in the wrong direction. His face was one of pure astonishment. What on earth? This can't be. Taking the chance to finish it, Rudius shot a look at Roxy and stepped forward. Zenoba's already charging up for the kill, and Rudius held out both hands to channel mana to them. If Zenoba landed his attack, they'd win. If he didn't, Rudius would use his Eye of Foresight to fire electric at whatever direction Randolph moved. Once paralyzed, Rudius would fire off stone cannon barrage. Even if he survived that, Roxy would pressure him until he lost his balance again. Eventually, they get lucky. It all seems to be playing out really good. It's like, as it builds up, it's like, this isn't going to work. It's like, this would be so like, wow, that was it. that was it. It wasn't a strategy they worked out beforehand, but they coordinated perfectly, backing Randolph into a corner. Zenoba swung down his club viciously at the Death God. But this time, the unbelievable happened. The Death God blocked his strike. He blocked Zenoba's club, swung with inhuman might of a blessed child, and he did it with his bare hand. It was an incredible feat of strength, worthy of a man placed among 7 great powers. This is so funny because this is one of those moments where it's like, oh man, this is probably not going to go well. And I actually started thinking right here, I'm like, I could totally see this being the moment where Rudius starts to channel mana into his ring, and then suddenly it cuts over, and then Orchid's like, huh? And then he starts running. He's like running on foot trying to get over to Sharon. He's like running away from the king dragon realm, trying to run on foot all the way over there, just like the previous whole scenario with Rada. Anyways, sorry, side joke. Continuing. Still, that wasn't going to save him. His arm broke under the strain. It was checkmate. Move, Zenoba. As Zenoba leapt reflexively to one side, a purple flash of lightning burst from Rudius' hand, with a crackle that lingered in the air behind it. The bolt of electricity struck the Death God and danced over his body. It landed a direct hit. Randolph's body stiffened in shock and slumped over like a falling tree. He stared at Rudius, pallid face twisted with bewilderment. His battle aura might have prevented the spell from frying him, but he couldn't prevent the paralysis from it. Moving to finish him off, Rudius fed mana into his weapon on his left arm. Shotgun trigger. A hail of stone cannon spells, each with the power of King or Emperor tier, flew towards the Death God. It was Rudius' specialty that even Orsted complimented him and was damaged by. The timing was perfect. The opportunity too beautiful to pass up. The Death God had no way of dodging this. They had won. Then, a split second later, all the stone cannons disappeared, reduced to puffs of sand midair. Oh, Sir Death God. Randolph's gaze shifted to something behind Rudius. Have you come to save me? Wasn't the Death God who they were fighting right now? Was he misleading them from the start? Rudius' heart was pounding fiercely as he spun around to search for a new arrival. However, there was nothing. Rudy! By the time Roxy had shouted his name, he was already falling. As he pitched backwards, he caught a glimpse of blue hair down his waist. Roxy had thrown herself against Rudius. With no time to wonder why, he turned mid-air to wrap his arms around her protectively, hitting the stairs back first. An instant later, his magic armor creaked in complaint, but he was uninjured. Looking back to the hallway, he's seen a very startled-looking Zenoba and the Death God, who had clearly swung his sword. The man was moving just fine. Was he not paralyzed? Crumpled on the floor? None of it made any sense. Word to the wise, Sir Rudius. A Death God always stands behind his prey. His face was perfectly composed, tone completely confident. It was all an act, allowing himself to be shocked, stumbling, falling, all coaxing Rudius to turning his back. Orsh had warned him about the way that Randolph fights. He should have seen it coming from half a mile away. Still, how did he manage that trick? How did the stone cannon disappear? Was he using his demon eye? On second thought, Rudius had seen this before, with the Hydra. Which meant, you have a stone of absorption, don't you? My. You saw through that quite quickly. It seems your reputation was well earned. The Death God held out his hand, the palm of his leather gauntlet embedded with a stone of absorption. Yeah, was like, yep, got that from Geese. I totally forgot that Geese had all that stuff. That was like one of those, oh yeah. Geese was down there with them, and he got a lot of those stones. So yep, he passing that out. His friend from back in the day, again, I'm totally convinced the two of them know each other. And he gave that gauntlet to him. Yeah, it sucks that eventually this kind of wraps up in a way because, like, I'm very curious as to what he's exactly doing here. But the idea of him calling out to the Death God behind Rudius and saying that he always stands behind his prey, it does make me believe that he is sort of, yes, just possibly tricking Rudius by making him believe that he's behind him. But there is like a side of me that almost believes, is there part of his power that he is technically always behind him? He's just waiting to strike. And then the moment that he gets him off guard, that's when he strikes from behind. But yeah, it does technically show later on that he did draw his sword and send a strike at Rudius. So it is technically him there. But it all goes in that idea of him messing with the mind of the person that he's playing against. He's causing Rudius to doubt himself, causing Rudius to think, is this right? Is this wrong? And it's kind of one of those clever, interesting things to really get in the mind of Rudius as you're wondering in one end, is it him in his own doubts that he typically has? Because the doubts that are playing in his head is stuff that we hear Rudius think about all the time. But how much of it is Rudius's usual self-doubt, and how much of it is what the Death God is doing to him? That's the clever and interesting thing there. What exactly is happening here? And it's super good. But yes, that stone of absorption is totally from Geese. And yes, already right here, I'm going to Roxy. What's happening with Roxy? I haven't heard anything from her. It hasn't said what she's done yet. What's happened to Roxy? Rudius hadn't noticed it before, but he must have used it to drain the mana from his spells. Ors had never mentioned him having one. Could have been one of the stones brought back from the labyrinth in Begarit. It wouldn't be surprising for an elite knight of the King Dragon realm to collect items of that kind, and it was a sort of thing Orsted might not even know about. That's one of those kind of annoying things about even bringing that stuff out of that labyrinth. They brought that stuff out of that labyrinth, and it's like one of those things of like, those could be tools that somebody else could use against you in the future. It kind of sucks they did that. But again, even back then I didn't trust Geese. Even back then I was questioning Geese. For those that don't remember, I was questioning where he got his information from. I even back then was thinking that he was probably talking to the Man God. Rudius got a little cocky, but he never expected to beat one of the seven so easily. It'd be tough to beat someone capable of totally canceling out his magic, but he knew exactly how the stone worked. That's the good thing there. He's actually studied it. You had to extend your hand in the direction of incoming spells and feed a little bit of mana into it. Rudius just had to make that impossible. And this already right here is making me believe that he is also a caster, that he does have a mana pool. Getting behind him seemed like the easiest way to go. This landing didn't give them much room to maneuver, but the three of them could work together. There had to be some way to get done. From the look of things, he only had one of the stones on him. He could have Zenoba charge while he and Roxy simultaneously attacked. If it didn't work, he could try something else. Trial and error was the only option. I like that comes up later. It's like, what? But the error is the bad part. Roxy, I need you to slip behind Zenoba, please. There was no reply. She hadn't moved a muscle since they stumbled down here. Rudius realized that his hand was wet, and it felt like her shoulder was a little damp. It was all red. Roxy? What? Oh God, what is this? There was a long gash in Roxy's robe. Blood seeped from underneath it. Rudius's heart pounded in his ears. Memories flashed vividly before him. Images of a man who died pushing him to safety. Image of his body lying lifeless on the ground. Paul had died saving him. Now, history was repeating itself. That totally just flashed in my head, too. That stupid illustration. No, this can't be happening. Roxy, I'm afraid it's happening. Would you please stop poking at my wound? It hurts. Rudius jerked his gaze away from her wound and found her glaring, narrowed eyes of a fairly irritated woman. Oh, right, sorry. He overreacted somewhat. When he released her from his arms, she murmured a healing spell that stopped the bleeding immediately. She scared the hell out of him for a second. Randolph stroked his chin quizzically. What's this? I was quite sure I struck a fatal blow. Rudius shivered at those words, but his wife was obviously fine. It seemed a little bit weird that the guy who called himself the Death God couldn't tell if he killed someone or not. Instead of taking Roxy's life, he costed Rudius years of his. Suddenly, there was an audible series of cracks from around Roxy's neck. The necklace that he had given her fell apart and dropped on the floor. A moment later, the ring that she wore shattered too. They were supposed to deploy a barrier in response to physical attacks. The necklace absorbed a single lethal blow. That meant it went through the physical barrier and then struck her, prevented the death, thus breaking both of them at the same time. And yes, I totally forgot about those by this time. It's been a couple weeks. So that's what did it. Now I see. Rudius shuddered involuntarily. It felt like a blizzard was howling through his body, draining all warmth and confidence from him as well. And he could have sworn that frigid wall of wind was descending from where the Death God stood. Rudius knew this feeling. He lost his nerve. But recognizing the problem didn't mean that he could do anything about it. He reflectively wrapped one arm around Roxy and held her tightly to himself. Rudy, he hadn't planned beyond this. He made that necklace as an insurance policy against this scenario. It wasn't luck that kept her alive. It was his foresight, but there would be no more safety nets from this point on. The man that they were fighting could kill them instantly with a single strike. Trial and error? How many trials can you hope against a monster like this? They had no continues left. If they kept fighting, one of them would die. What the hell was he thinking picking a fight with one of the 7 great powers with no preparation? Ors had warned him to keep his distance unless he had his magic armor on. This whole thing was a massive mistake. Zenoba, back off. Now. We need to get out of here.
Master Rudius?
We can't beat him like this, all right? We need to get version 1 if we're going to stand a chance. He didn't lower his club, but he did take a few steps back and frowned at Rudius.
Oh, I think you're putting up a respectable fight. In particular, that last attack was very nasty. I'm not sure I could ward it off again, now that I've revealed my trump card.
Rudius thought that they had him at first, but he wasn't buying this crap. Randolph was lying to him. Orchid had explained it clearly enough. The Death God lured you into attacking or defending. These words were another part of his technique. Could Rudius be sure of that, though? Maybe he'd turned off his enthralling blade and spoke actual thoughts. That comment wasn't exactly subtle after all. What if he was trying to make... Rudius shook his head. Bottom line, nothing this man said was trustworthy. And there was at least one thing that he knew for sure. He couldn't beat the Death God. Not like this. That had been drilled into his head in a single terrifying moment. Zenoba seemed to feel differently, however.
If you won't fight, Master Rudius, just stay right there and watch. I'll face this man alone, force my way past him, and see my brother face to face.
Once again, he charged the Death God. The next few moments played in slow motion. Zenoba stepped forward, then another, sluggishly. All color drained from the world, and sound faded into silence. Eye of Foresight showed the Death God moving far faster. He was a blur, too quick for Rudius' superpowered senses to follow. Time snapped back to normal. The flash of a blade left an afterimage in the air. Zenoba! Randolph's sword had caught Zenoba low on the flank and cut diagonally into his shoulder. Zenoba's armor shattered, his body sent upward, hitting the ceiling hard, then plummeting to the ground in front of Rudius. The world was still strangely quiet, and Rudius felt like he was having some surreal nightmare. Rudius' heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Was he still alive? His armor was pulverized. How was it possible to shatter metal like that with a single swing of a sword? To think my armor-crushing slice could be endured. Rudius' heart returned to normal. It was true. Zenoba wasn't even scratched, although he had a bluish bruise on his skin. Zenoba groaned and pushed himself into sitting position. He glared up the stairs fiercely at Randolph. You're quite the impressive specimen, oh blessed one. It would seem that slicing you into pieces may not be practical. The Death God met Zenoba's gaze from above, that horrific smile on his face. He slowly slipped his sword back into its sheath. That said, I'm no inherent of the sword god style. I feel no pressing need to use my blade exclusively. You're quite vulnerable to fire magic, as I recalled. King Pax mentioned something of the sort. He could use magic too? Again, yeah, I completely expected this. Completely expected this. And yes, it technically makes sense if he's saying, I'm not adhered to the Sword God style. Yeah, the Sword God style is all about offense, and it's all about the sword and all that kind of stuff. Whereas, again, like, North God style is all about, like, tricks. Use whatever you have. So it makes sense that he's saying that. And yeah, magic could be included in that. He could use magic too. Zenoba's armor was enchanted, but it may not work all smashed up like this. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing to note there. If it is like a magic armor, it's infused like an enchantment's in it to protect against the fire. Does that technically work when it's shattered? Is the enchanting almost like a magic circle or whatever that's on it that will break? Or if the mana doesn't flow properly, it doesn't protect? Zenoba was back on his feet. The man still hadn't given up. He picked up his club and was tensing for another charge. Roxy got up as well, stepping forward with her staff raised. She was placing herself protectively in front of Rudius. Finally, Rudius got on his feet. Zenoba was a stubborn man. He may fight Randolph until he was killed. Plus, Rudius couldn't allow any harm to come to Roxy. If she died here, Rudius would die in spirit. You haven't given up then. Randolph studied them with no particular emotion in his eyes. He hadn't assumed a stance, nor was he chanting a spell. He was just standing there, confident and relaxed. It seemed he had no intention of launching an attack first. He claimed they were putting up a respectable fight, but that was a joke. It felt like he was taking it easy on them. The man nullified an entire barrage of stone cannons. He could have just canceled their spells from the start. I think that's an aspect of also kind of seeing what they do and reading them. He could be kind of similar to Orson in the idea that he just likes to watch what people do and learn from them. He might like learning combat ability, and so watching Rudius play out might actually intrigue him. But yeah, there is also the side of it is he creating a mystique that they're winning in order to catch him off guard? And that's plainly how he plays. And yes, if he is of like partly the Water God style, he might be waiting for them to attack to create a counter. But instead, he just let them cast the spells and tease Rudius into carelessness. He could very well have other tricks up his sleeve, or sit to attack when he wanted to defend, and vice versa. Could this mean that his hesitation was exactly what the Death God wanted? Rudius couldn't tell, had no idea how to proceed. He was stuck, second-guessing every single thought. Roxy's necklace was gone, Zenoba's armor as well. They had no idea what the enemy was capable of, and version 2 might not be able to protect one attack. This wouldn't work. It just wouldn't. They needed to back off. He may need to beat Zenoba senseless from behind to fall back and regroup. Yeah, again, that's that whole thing of like, when Orsa was mentioning that, it's like, how does that work? So if you think you should attack, you should defend. But if you think, okay, well, I'm going to defend because I want to attack, doesn't that mean that you're defending and thus mean that you should be attacking? It's like it's a constant cycle there. But again, I think how this plays out, if this is what the Death God is actually doing to Rudius, it's super fascinating in the idea that, is this what's playing in his mind, literally what the Death God's putting in there for his mind? You understand now, Zenoba? This is hopeless. If you keep charging straight at him, you're going to die.
But, Master Rudius, Pax could be...
The Death God was waiting for something here. We've got some time to work with. Let's regroup and come back with a plan. He saw Zenoba hesitate. On some level, he had to know that he stood no chance right now. Oh, are you leaving now? What a pity. I think His Majesty will be finishing up quite soon. It had to be another trap. Yeah, well, we'll be back soon, though. Reese called out to the Death God warily. The question was how easily he let them go. I'm sorry for attacking you suddenly, all right? I guess we got a little carried away. Do you think you can find it in your heart to let us leave for now? Reese wasn't expecting this pathetic whimpering to work, of course. Even as he spoke, Reese was steadying his breath and looking for how he would react. Most likely, they would have to fight to retreat back to the magic armor. If he chose not to chase them, all the better. Well, if that's what you want, go right ahead. He let them walk. That didn't seem especially coherent. What was his objective here? Sir Randolph, what instructions did the man god give you anyways? None whatsoever. I've never met him in my life. He could be lying, though. But you said you knew his name. A relative of mine was acquainted with him some time ago, and I learned the name from him. That's all there is to it, really. I've never seen this man god or communicated him in any way. You're not one of his disciples? I'm not exactly sure what that term implies, but I suppose not. He says relative. Makes me think that he's somehow related in... It could be like in a separation there, but he could be related in some way to Geese. Rudius had jumped to conclusions. Yeah, no crap, dude. He wondered what was going on with himself these days. Does that mean that you're not an enemy of King Pax either? I'm a staunch ally in both the King Pax and his queen, Benedict. I assure you. They were the only ones to ever compliment my cooking, you see. Rudius, you could have had the Death God literally be your buddy if you didn't mean to his cooking. So there isn't some weird ritual going on inside here or anything? You're not just trying to buy time until it's over? Well, I suppose you could call it a ritual of sorts, but I'd rather not elaborate with such a young lady present. The Death God's eyes darted to Roxy as he spoke. She scowled at the patronizing comment. To be fair to Randolph, she didn't look like a woman with a husband and a child. Now here's like one of those moments of like, why would he say that? Again, he's been in the Demon Continent for a long time. He should know who the Megurians are. He should know what her race is and that she looks like. Now again, it could be one of those things where, yes, technically, how do you tell the age of a Megurian? Unless he was like there all the time and could tell like, well, if they're like this centimeter tall, that usually means they're around this age. It's a really hard way to kind of judge exactly what their age is. While Ruius processed this, it seemed the fight was unnecessary. In that case, he probably needed to apologize to the Death God. Okay then. I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions. It sounds like we're on the same side here. Let me apologize again for attacking you like that. No, it was my fault as well. The Randolph bowed his head. I should have explained myself more clearly. He's such a nice guy. He's such a nice guy. I think he is being manipulated through proxy, but at least he himself is a nice guy. I feel kind of bad. He was a nice guy. Ruius was glad they got this all cleared up. Wait, it could be an Act 2. Buying time while he charges his instant kill move or something. Well, okay, that was a dumb example, but you never knew. Ruius couldn't even think straight anymore. If this really was the next number in his Puppet Master act, he got Ruius doing the tango in his palm. Oh? Randolph glanced backwards and visibly relaxed. Ruius didn't let his guard down one bit. He wasn't going to get careless. It seems it's over. Ruius questioned his comment. Come now, there's no need to be so wary. I have no intentions of killing you three. Very believable. Didn't you say something about a fatal blow before? Maybe I was hearing things. Huh? I suppose you got me there. You're quite the wit, Sir Rudius. Great. Ruius amused Mr. Skullface. Not that he was trying to. In any case, King Pax ordered me to let no one enter until the thing was finished. And now it is, so I fulfilled my task. Randolph returned his sword to its place on his hip before settling back into his chair with a sigh. That doesn't make any sense. He already put his sword away. I think that was an inconsistency there. I keep an eye on these kind of things. I know it's dumb. Please feel free to enter. Was it a trap? Seemed plausible. Randolph studied them before commenting. Does the thought of showing me your back disturb you? I suppose I could excuse myself for a moment.
That won't be necessary.
Zenobia placed his club back to his waist.
We'll take you at your word.
Inspired by his brave friend's example, Ruius decided to believe the fight was over. The battle against the Death God had ended as awkwardly as it began. Oh, now something else could happen in the coming chapters, but I'm like, holy crap, that just kind of wrapped up there. So I guess if something else doesn't happen, I guess that means that we're done with Randolph for now, which I kind of like because again, during this fight, the entire time I'm thinking, how do you kill this guy? I am pretty convinced that the part of his bloodline that is the Immortal Demon King would not allow him to die. Like, I think he might have partial immunity there or immortality there. Now, because he has a partial amount and he's not like full blood or whatever, it could mean that he doesn't have immortality, like he can be destroyed in some way. Which, yes, they kind of imply that they sort of can, but I kind of assume that there was no way they're going to beat him unless they can somehow restrain him or whatever and get the hell out of there. I just had a feeling this wasn't going to end with Randolph dying. I felt like there was some chance that Randolph was going to get away. Or again, they were going to figure out some way to stop a Demon King. Like, can you lop off their head and put it in a box and it keeps them from regenerating or whatever? It's endless possibilities there. But yeah, a rough fight with a lot of confusion in there, which I'm very curious about at this point. I hope we get into more of it later. But I like that. It's literally like, again, implying they were doing it. So he's like, it's done. Like, he could literally hear them, like, the creaking or whatever happening. He's like, it looks like he's done. All right, you guys can go inside. That was literally his orders. Don't go in. He doesn't care who goes in there. He's like, whatever. I was just ordered to keep the guys from going in. It's done. That's my orders. Whatever happens, happens. Like, they could literally be coming there to kill Pax, but his orders was just to not let anybody in there. And after that, who cares? That's my orders. It's really interesting. Oh, here's the oof part. Let's get into the oof part. This is what I've been building up to. This is really the part where I'm going to probably talk a lot, and it's probably going to be a long Mushoku Monday. The king's chambers occupied the top floor of the royal palace. It was the finest suite anyone could have asked for, an extravagant testament to the kingdom of Chiron's wealth. The walls were lined with paintings. Beautiful statues stood on finely crafted desks, and near the back of the room there was an enormous canopy bed. The thing had to be almost 5 meters wide. The sheets were rumpled. In the middle of the bed, a blue-haired girl was wrapped up in them, sleeping quietly. It was Queen Benedict, and judging from the clothing scattered carelessly on the floor nearby, she was lying there naked. A familiar scent hung in the air. Two people had very recently been loving each other very much, in a way you can't describe within an earshot of a child. So Pax and his queen had been getting busy up until just a moment ago. The man was aware his kingdom was falling apart around him, right? Talk about nonchalant. I think it's just a one last time. I mean, as you see, it's literally just a one last time. Get it? One last happy. Pax himself was out on the balcony at the moment, leaning on its railing and gazing down at the Capitol below. His stubby limbs and large head made him look almost childlike, and his features were more homely than regal. He was clad only in his underwear, showing off his back that was moderately muscular. It was also covered in scars and faded bruises. The story of his life was written on his body. Faded bruises. I guess, like, yeah, the faded bruises, the idea that, like, they're gone now, but it's like, that means that he's been recently struck? That's interesting. Yeah, the scars definitely shows that he was treated pretty dang badly, and that would probably be at the King Dragon realm. I don't see it happening recently unless he kind of harmed himself in order to steal his body. I was wondering what all this commotion was about. So, you've returned, brother. The instant Pax turned his back towards them, Reese realized how wrong he'd been about his state of mind. He had the face of an exhausted man, a man on the verge of giving up entirely, but he seemed oddly calm as well. Randolph had said something about Pax coming to terms with the situation. Apparently, there had been some actual coming involved in the process. Damn it. Reese had been there. Sometimes, you gotta let it all out.
Yes, Your Majesty, I am here to rescue you. Let us abandon the palace and make way to Fort Coron together.
Zenobia strode up to the balcony and extended his hand to his brother. Pax looked at it dubiously for a moment, then snorted. You're here to rescue me? Surely. You're not serious.
Your Majesty, it would be wisest to surrender this position for now and gather our strength elsewhere. You could take the palace back at any time once we've gathered an army of sufficient size.
And then what? Do I repeat the cycle once again? Pax met Zenobia's gaze with eyes so cold, Rias nearly shuddered.
Repeat what cycle, Your Majesty?
As if you'd understand, Pax snorted and muttered under his breath. His eyes flicked out over the balcony. Comical as it might sound now, I did my best to rule the kingdom well. I dismissed the corrupt ministers my father left behind and gave their post to others more deserving. I gathered mercenaries to guard against the threat of war. I won't deny that public safety suffered as a result, but I was trying to secure the future of Sharon. Pax slumped his back against the balcony's railing, then pointed to Zenobia. That was the same reason I allowed you to return, brother, and gave you an unreasonable task. It seemed the wisest choice available, in all honesty. I still hate you, but I do respect your usefulness as a blessed child.
I'm well aware, Your Majesty, and I understand how difficult these decisions were for you.
Reese found Zenobia's reply calm and reasonable, but for some reason, it infuriated his brother. He clenched both hands tightly into a fist and glared with bitter fury in his eyes at Zenobia. You don't understand a thing. No one understands me, and no one cares to try. Just look, you fool. The proof is right before your eyes. The king gestured to the world beyond the balcony. It was quiet, but a ring of rebel bonfires burned around the palace. The huge crowd surrounding the city looked like a massive army surrounding Latakia. A horde of soldiers. My own troops, and yet they make no move to crush these rebels.
You're mistaken, Your Majesty. The large majority of the crowd consists of ordinary citizens, not soldiers. Many of them are simply merchants or adventurers of unclear origins.
What difference does it make? It's still proof that everyone from the kingdom has rejected me. Guys, all feels like it's playing out like to make him believe that. But again, it also kind of plays into his own self-doubts. It's almost like one of those things of it could be causing it, but it can also be a thing that it's just that's how he thinks and it's his own fault. Reese was starting to feel a bit alarmed, but forced himself to look on in silence. This wasn't the time for him to speak. Zenobia was the only person here that might calm his brother down.
That's simply not true. Not all of your subjects have turned against...
Don't patronize me. You yourself could have led an army to the city. But instead, it's only you three, and the other two there are here to keep you safe, not me. Isn't that right?
Well,
He wasn't wrong. Reese was only here for Zenobia. He didn't care what happened to Pax, or even Sharon. You're supposed to because your boss told you to keep him alive. That's what I thought. It's always been this way. No matter how hard I try, no one gives a damn. Whenever I convince myself I've succeeded, everything crumbles apart. Mere moments later, my efforts always backfire in the end. Always. Pax paused for a moment. Just long enough to jab an accusatory finger at Roxy. Roxy. Startled by the sudden attention, Roxy froze in alarm and made no reply. You know what I mean, don't you? Or have you forgotten entirely by now? What? Think back to the moment when I mastered my first intermediate level spell. Roxy's eyes darted around uncertainly. I studied to the best of my abilities. I practiced, and I practiced, and when I finally succeeded, what was your reaction? Well, Rudius could see her out of the corner of his eye. She seemed flustered by the question. He couldn't tell if it was because she had forgotten about this, or because she knew it too well. You sighed, damn you. What? As I celebrated my accomplishment, you sighed at me. You might as well come out and said it. About time. Took you long enough. Do you have any idea how crushed I was? For what's to come here in a minute, this sucks so bad. This sucks so bad. Because the entire time right here, I'm thinking, she's going to fix this. Zenoba's not getting through. I'm like, it's got to be Roxy that fixes this. I was convinced by this moment. Well, actually, I was convinced at the moment before he spoke to Roxy. I'm like, I wonder if Roxy's the one that's going to fix the situation. Is she going to be the one that talks some sense into him? And even as it progressed past this point, I'm just constantly thinking, she's got to say something. She has her opportunity to say something. Again, before they got here, before they left on the journey, she was saying she felt at fault. This chapter is going to break her. I just have a feeling this is going to break her. Oh, it hurts. It hurts. Ugh. Roxy's eyes went wide, and she bit her lower lip. Was this actually true? It was incredibly hard to believe. She'd always been happy for Rudius when he made progress. I think her sighing and yes, him thinking that she's saying about time. Again, what did she say? And this is what sucks, that she didn't say something right here, and I don't think he would listen. To be fair, whatever she said, I don't think at this point Pax would listen. But yes, I can totally see Roxy in her own mind right here wanting to say, no, I felt like I was the failure. She felt like what she said back then, she felt like she was a failure. Rudius proved that he was better than her, and then when she tried to train Pax, she felt like she was a failure. She couldn't help him. And thus, she sighed probably because she thought that she wasn't good enough. He proceeded as, about time, took you long enough. She in her mind was thinking, damn, I'm not good at this. I'm not good at this. I need to get better. I'm not a good teacher. That's what sucks. But again, if she said, no, I thought it because I was failing you, I don't think it would receive. I don't think he would receive it. And I like how Rudius is the best person from this moment right here to see what Pax is probably going through. And still, despite it all, I adored you. You treated me less dismissively than anyone else I knew. Even after that awful moment, I desperately strove to catch your interest, but to no avail. Your mind was always elsewhere, and your eyes looked right through me. You were too busy writing your letters to some man I'd never heard of, to much so glance in my direction. Why, I began to ask myself, was I even bothering? Why work so hard when all my efforts were so clearly wasted? My motivation waned and failed, so then you gave up on me entirely. You looked at me like I was a rotting piece of garbage, and your lessons grew more half-hearted by the day. In the end, you shrugged and left Sharon for good. Pax tore at his hair as he ranted on and on. The memories must have been flashing vividly through his mind. His eyes were rimmed with tears and grew more bloodshot by the second. But I'm sorry, Pax. Back then I was... Shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses. Roxy fell silent, expression one of deep regret. Again, she tried to say something. He's not going to receive it right now. That sucks. Yeah, and I think this is what the sucky thing is like, yes, I was trying to get your attention. You brushed me off. Your stuff started getting more half-hearted. It's all a sign that I think that, yes, she felt she was a failure and that it wasn't getting through. Now, yes, a lot of that has to do with the fact that he was being... This could be the part where he was being way too aggressive with her and way too flirtatious and way too clingy and gropey, and thus she was pushing away. He was trying to get her attention, not saying it was right the way he was doing it, but in his mind, he was trying to get her. He was so obsessed with her because she was the only one that was paying attention and giving him any chance. That's why he was obsessed with her. He was obsessed with her because she was the only one that would accept him and give him praise and give him notice. And then he wanted it more and he was craving it more and he became obsessed with her. And that was causing her, if this is the same part, to push him away and eventually leave. It sucks, but at least I understand it. It's so disgusting and unsettling and sucky and tragic, and it sucks and I hate it all. Anyways, again, a pure sign of being willing to get into such nasty stuff Makes good storytelling. I wish more writers would do it. Ruiz could see some people saying at this moment, no effort is ever wasted, or something equally cliche, but he had no right to lecture Pax on this subject. Since his arrival in this world, Ruiz had gotten plenty of external validation for his efforts. When he tried his hardest, he usually got results. Not to say that he never failed, but when he succeeded, there were people there to compliment him. How would he know if efforts was its own reward? He'd never been in Pax's shoes. I like it. I like it. I like it. I like when Ruiz thinks about this kind of stuff. Oh, it's so good. Oh, never mind. It's not like you were wrong about me, clearly. Pax deflated before their eyes. Shoulders slumped, and voice grew softer. His Majesty handed me the kingdom of Sharon on a platter, and look what I've made of it. No one accepts me as king. No one rallies to my banner. Instead, they flock to join the rebel army in the name of some random child who may not even be a prince. And in their uprising, I've lost all the knights of the King Dragon realm entrusted to me. I can only imagine His Majesty's disappointment. Pax smiled in bitter amusement. Tears flowed freely down his face. In the end, I suppose it was only Benedict who ever truly cared for me. She loved me as I was, for what I am. Words never came naturally to her, but she smiled for me, and that meant the world. It seemed Pax was heard below. Murmurs were coming from the bonfires around the palace. Perhaps some soldiers spotted Pax up on the balcony. Pax glanced down at them with a look of dull disinterest. Tell me, brother, what should I have done?
I would not presume to say. However, I imagine killing all of our siblings went a bit too far.
Yes, I suppose that's true. But if I'd let them live, I think they would have started another rebellion, much like this one.
You may be right.
Zenobia paused for a moment, then shook his head as if to chase the thought away.
In any case, everyone makes mistakes, and once you've reflected on them, you can apply these lessons you've learned to your next endeavors.
His cheerful words echoed throughout the chamber. The man had an amazing ability to ignore even the heaviest of moods. It seems I'm incapable of that. All I ever do is repeat the same mistakes, over and over. The slow, steady way Pax shook his head in that moment looked exactly like the way Zenobia did it sometimes. The two of them were completely different in appearance, but they did have a lot of mannerisms in common at least. Raising his head, Pax glanced at something behind Rudius. Randolph? Yes, Your Majesty. Rudius was startled, just a little. The man was standing right behind him. It's always behind you. He didn't even notice his approach. It was kind of unnerving. What was with that whole always standing behind his prey thing? Proceed, as instructed earlier. Please. Your wish is my command, Your Majesty. Good. Ruiz wondered what these instructions were. Were they about to find themselves back in a battle with the Death God? Their position was terrible. He had gotten way too close. Without version 1, it would be tough to fight anyways. But if it started point blank, they didn't stand a chance. All these thoughts flashed in his head instantly. But before he could react in any way, Pax hopped up over the railing of his balcony. It was the 5th floor. He jumped off the damn balcony.
Oh!
Zenobia sprinted forward. There wasn't even the slightest chance that he'd make it in time. But he ran anyways. He reached his hand out, desperately. He grabbed hold of the railing with both hands and leaned forward. His momentum ripped the metal off the balcony, sending him tumbling into the air. Zenobia! Ruiz's heart was pounding with panic. He spun around and ran out of the room as fast as he could. He found them in the palace gardens. Zenobia was kneeling in the dirt, his face blank with shock, cradling his brother's lifeless body in his arms.
Hurry, Master Rudius,
he croaked as he approached.
Use your healing magic.
Kneeling, Rudius retrieved a scroll from his robe and placed it against Zenobia. The fall from the 5th floor had left him visibly bruised and battered.
No. Use it on Pax.
Rudius shook his head without a word. Pax was already dead. It looked like he had hit the ground head first. It was a gruesome sight. Rudius at least wanted to believe that he didn't feel any pain.
He's gone?
Zenobia asked quietly. Yes. I'm sorry, Zenobia. Rudius hadn't even considered that he might suddenly leap to his death like that, but in retrospect, it might have been the intention from the start. Pax had been surrounded by his enemy and felt like he had no allies to turn to. Maybe that's why he never tried to flee the palace. He thought he had nowhere to go. Maybe he'd anguished over his situation for days on end, ultimately deciding he was complete failure as a king. Maybe he was ready to die from the moment that they walked in that door.
Master Rudius.
Still cradling his brother's body, Zenobia looked up into the night sky. The top floor of the palace was visible far above. A beautiful full moon hung in the sky beyond it. There was no king in that majestic castle now. It was nothing but an empty shell.
How could I have failed so completely?
Rudius didn't know what to say.
Were all my efforts meaningless?
No, you did everything you could, Zenobia. I mean it. Pax hadn't recognized his brother's efforts for what they were. He was desperate. She hit me out of nowhere, damn it. I don't like Pax, but it's a brother thing. It's grieving for Zenoba, really, is what it is. He was desperate for others to acknowledge his own hard work, but couldn't do the same for Zenoba. That's so true, actually. That is actually true. I didn't notice that before. Honestly, it felt like the man was barely even aware of Zenoba as anything except another piece on this chessboard. But that could have changed over time. Pax could have eventually learned to trust Zenoba. Ruiz had always thought that Pax as an irredeemable scumbag. But even so, he felt like Zenoba would have gotten through to him eventually.
Why? Why did it come to this?
I wish I knew, Zenoba. For a little while after that, Zenoba brooded wordlessly. He eventually looked up at Rudius with an expression of a man who just remembered something.
Could it be that this too was the man god's doing?
Rudius still had no idea what strings the man god was pulling. None of his disciples had revealed themselves, but in the normal flow of history, Pax was destined to turn the kingdom into a republic eventually, following a few twists and turns. Now those events were never going to happen. If the man god was involved, that was probably the reason. Maybe his one and only goal this time had been to cause Pax's death. Yeah, unless again something comes up here soon, that's pretty much my conclusion that I've come to at this point. Rudius thought that he was involved, but it was a proxy thing. I think there might be a thing of like, yes, hoping that Rudius get killed in the process, but I think the goal here was, yeah, to kill Pax and to hope that, I guess that's where I go to with this whole thing. I think the goal here is to send Pax over here, get him killed, but the hope is that Rudius will get involved and die in the process. But again, there's still time. They're still not out of Ch8-10 at this point. The pixelated bastard could see the future. He didn't have to send someone to murder you if he could set off some series of events that he knew would drive you to despair and suicide, right? That's what he did to you. That's what he did to Rudius. Again, I think part of that was because he wanted to get rid of Roxy, but yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with, yeah, and then he didn't have to worry about Rudius anymore. Rudius went down this spiral of depression and destruction. To be honest, that sounded like a really slow, roundabout way of doing things. Maybe the man god had played no direct part in anything that occurred here over the last few weeks. But Rudius knew one thing for sure. The man god had arranged for his first visit to the kingdom many years ago. That directly resulted in Pax's exile to the King Dragon realm. And according to Orsted, the Republic of Ch8-10 would cause the man god's problems in the future. He acted to prevent it from coming into existence at least once. Very true. It seems safe to assume that he'd always been looking for ways to deal with Pax, one way or another. What a disaster. Rudius felt like he should have realized all this from the start. He jumped to all sorts of conclusions, some of them less than reasonable, because he hated Pax too much to think the damn thing through. That's a big oof. That is a big oof right there, actually. I didn't think about that again before. It's literally Rudius going, I messed up. I was too damn concerned about how evil and nasty this guy is that I failed him. I failed Pax. I failed this mission. I failed Orsted. I failed to see that there was potential here. I failed to see that Pax was actually doing something good, or that he was changing his ways, and that he was trying to do something good. I was too preoccupied by my preconceived notions of this person. I think that is technically one of those nasty things in relationships, I guess, as a whole. Like, not like close relationships, but just your interaction with somebody. That you can't get past those barriers that are placed before you because you've seen them do something wrong, or because they're still a nasty person, but you could have helped them, you could have guided things, you could have helped this bigger picture, but you were too busy and too focused on, this guy's going to probably try to get me killed. It sucks. Rudius finally replied, yeah, it's possible.
I see.
Zenoba gently lowered his brother's body to the ground, then exhaled, very slowly. His expression suggests he was crying, but no tears ran down his face. Rudius didn't think that he'd be so stoic in his shoes. After a long silence, yeah, I mean, the idea there is if, like, Aisha, Norna... Talk, Andrew. Yes, the idea there is that if Norn or Aisha were to die. After a long silence, he turned to Rudius and murmured,
let's go home.
Rudius nodded. There wasn't much more to be said. And that is chapter 10. Oh my gosh. This is a long recording, but where do I start? I kind of wanted to finish the segment. My conclusions at this point is, again, yeah, I definitely think that Geese is working with Randolph, or at least communicating to him in some way, and that's how he got the stone. So it has to be here recently that he communicated with Geese. And we've already kind of established that Geese is obviously working for the Man God. There's a side of me that believes that, yeah, I think there may be some connection with Jade, working with Jade, or somebody connected with Jade. That could be possibly another connection there. This really sucks, and I hope this isn't the case, because this just makes this wound even deeper. There's a side of me that believes that possibly Benedict is working for the Man God. Now, again, they've kind of implied that before with the first meeting with Pax as they came back here, that possibly that little cute, you know, wife of his right next to him is probably working. I think that's actually very much a possibility. She may have communicated to him and worked with him and possibly suffered him to work for the Man God. Oh God, this guy's kind of dirty, but the Man God told me that I need to work with him and I'll be happy or whatever. That he's going to do something great. Or I need to do this for this purpose. Or that you will have a more happier life or whatever. Something in there, you'll make your father happy. Something to drive her to work with Pax. And that, again, would hurt in the idea that she placated him, played into him, tricked him into thinking that she liked him, all for the sake that she right here would drive him to jump. That you're failing. He says that she's the only one that accepted him and liked him, but she could also manipulate him in a way that nobody else could in this moment. And believing that it's over, that it's done. I almost thought that she was dead in the bed. Like maybe he killed her to end her suffering before he went over there and went to jump. But I do believe there's probably a good chance that she was manipulating him. If that's the case, that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt. And I kind of thought that was a I'm not sure if I talked about it on the Mushoku Mondays. I kind of thought that was a possibility way back there when they first met her. Because I'm like, that could possibly be the bad thing there. That at some point during this whole situation, Benedict is revealed to being a disciple of the Man God. And then Rudius has to kill her. And Pax wouldn't be happy with that. And it would cause a massive fight right there. Because he had to kill Benedict, while Pax obviously would not want her dead. But that's kind of where my theory is going right now. But I guess this does technically kind of, in a lot of ways, possibly could clear Zenoba from being a disciple. In the idea that in the response to this whole situation, could it be that this was the Man God's doing? Now, it could be that Zenoba is working with the Man God, and at this point he's going, the next time I talk to him, I'm going to tell him, you got my brother killed. And he believes Rudius when Rudius says that, yes, this person that you've been talking to did this to your brother. But I think this sort of clears the Man God from Zenoba, possibly. But yeah, this whole situation sucks. And like I said, the biggest ouch of this whole thing is going to be Roxy. I am just expecting this next chapter. What's the chapter called? Chapter 11, Aftermath, which we're not getting into, by the way. If you've not guessed it by this point, we're probably like 3 hours in or something like that. This is going to hurt Roxy bad. Again, she came into this believing, again, way back here when she was teaching Pax. After that, she said that her whole teaching with Pax, she felt like a failure. She wasn't good enough. Rudius was better than her, and she wasn't working with Pax. Like, it wasn't working with him. She realized, I'm not a good teacher at that point. She believed she was a failure. And Pax seen, she hated him and pushed him away despite the fact that she was the first person to accept him, and he tried to make her acknowledge him. She wasn't paying attention. She was sighing like, oh, finally. He was a failure in the end. Now, cut forward, before they left, Roxy said, I feel like I'm at fault. I could have done more for him. I failed him. She felt like she was partially responsible for what Pax was doing. This evil thing that Pax did, she's at fault. She blamed herself. Cut to this point. He says straight to her face, hey, all this stuff, nobody acknowledged me. I tried so hard and it kept failing. And you two pushed me away. Again, it's your fault, Roxy. And now here, he jumps to his death. And Zenoba's crying his eyes out. They failed their mission. And she failed her student. Roxy, at this point, probably in her head, is thinking, I failed my student. She's a teacher right now. So it's like, even if it wasn't solidified before, teaching Rudius, teaching Pax, now she is a teacher. And it's more solidified in her mind that she is a teacher. And every one of her students are important to her, and she wants to train each and every one of them. That little brief moment with her with Norn. You have anything that you need help with? Am I explaining it well enough? She's got a teacher mindset now. She cherishes her students. And Pax is a past student that she failed. And he jumps to his death. And she's going to totally personalize that. She's going to make that extremely personal to her. And it breaks my heart because I feel like it's going to break her. Like in this chapter, I was afraid that Roxy was going to die physically, which would make me extremely mad. And I hope it doesn't happen in this volume. We still got some chapters to go. I felt she was going to die physically. Thankfully, it was just a fake out. Here, I think she died emotionally. Like this is, I think, is going to break her. And it sucks. It sucks. And it gives us no indication in this chapter. So I'm kind of really not wanting to, but wanting to continue on reading. Because it gives us no indication here how she responded to that. It was literally Zenoba rushing, Reese rushing down. And that was it. But this sucks, yes. For Zenoba, this sucks. Because, again, this is finally, with these last couple chapters, finally establishing that, yes, he did have a care for Pax as his brother. And, again, we've already established that before. He cared for his brother, that he unfortunately, he regrets massively that he killed his one of his brothers by breaking his neck. And here, he was wanting to come here to help his brother. This is my only brother I have left. My only blood relative left. And I want to help him. And he comes in there with all desire to help Pax. Tries to talk Pax down from that cliff. And Pax still turn, jump. It's tragic. It's just absolutely tragic. I hate it. I really do hate it. And again, I do honestly believe this was a act of the man god to get him killed. And again, I think it was to drag Rudius into it as well at the same time. This isn't what the man god would do. I think what the man god would do if he wanted to get rid of Pax is, yes, have him killed in the King Dragon realm. And this is the thing that Rudius is, because he doesn't know what we know. Rudius in his mind is trying to figure out, no, that would be what the man god would do. But we know, because Geese is involved, that the Geese is going to put into play multiple routes here to do multiple things. Oh yeah, give him Sharon back. The man god's like, what? Trust me, give it back to him. Then we're going to tell these guys over here to invade. They're going to be in a disarray. And guess what? This Zenoba guy, Rudius knows him. And now he's going to get involved too. So you can possibly kill two birds, one stone. That's what Geese is going to do. That's his hope. I am really surprised that Geese didn't tell the Death God in this moment when you see Rudius kill him. That's the oddity there. That's the only oddity there that kind of complicates things on the front of Geese knowing the Death God. But again, he could be building something else, and this is all just happenstance. He didn't know Reese was going to be there. Who knows? Oh, geez, this set of chapters, emotionally scary, intriguing. The whole thing with the Death God and his ability to possibly manipulate the hell out of Rudius. That whole fight was crazy. What else? Oh, the command. What was the command? He turned to the Death God and said, "Proceed as I instructed earlier, please." He said, "Your wish is my command, Your Majesty." My only thought here is, because they don't mention him ever again after that, my assumption is that he told him, "Go back to your kingdom," because he was faithful to him. These two are the only ones that ever complimented my cooking. I think he was. Oh my gosh! It's opening a can of worms. Okay, first this. I think it was just literally telling him, go back home. Because he was faithful to him. You like my cooking. I'm going to do what he wishes. He commands me. I'm going to follow his orders. He's doing what he was told. The King Dragon Realm told him, follow him, protect him. He's doing that. And he likes the guy. He complimented my food. I'm faithful to him. I'm going to do my job. He's going to do his job. But I think right here, he's literally knowing that he's lost it all. I think Randolph knows this. There could be a chance that somebody's told him, yeah, let him get to this position, and then let him sit there and bake in it. He could know this was all planned to make Pax lose his will to live, whatever. But I think right here, yes, he just knows it's over. And in that moment, I think, yeah, Pax told him, okay, I'm done. Go home. And he's like, okay, yes, sir, on the way. I don't think it's like an instructions to go out there and take anybody down. I don't think any of that's going to play out. So I think it was literally just send him off. But yes, I'm kind of wondering this idea of, why did Pax say his cooking was good? There's a chance that, yes, Randolph could cook other things perfectly fine. It's just that he was trying to do this other thing and it was failing miserably. There could be a chance that, yes, Randolph could be actually good at other stuff. But there's also another side of me that believes that the reason why Pax said that his cooking was good, complimented his cooking, was because he knows that Randolph is trying hard. What did we just get done talking about? Pax kept trying. Nobody acknowledged him. Now there's somebody here that's trying. He's like me. You're doing good. I like this. He complimented Randolph because he's seen himself in Randolph. Possibly. Who knows? We'll see. What else? What else is in this chapter that I skipped past? There's too much in here, dude. Well, I think the thing that sucks the most about Pax's mindset here is that it's hard to argue against. That's the sad thing. It's like it starts from that moment where, yeah, I would argue that he's just an idiot and he just keeps screwing up. And I think that compounds in his young life, that he keeps being seen as not worthy. He keeps screwing up. He keeps doing bad things. And that leads eventually to him having a tutor, which is Roxy. At that point, he finally gets acceptance and he finally wants to get more of that acceptance. But she's pushing him away, which we've already discussed why I think she was pushing him away. But that drives him to the point where he starts to do bad things because he wants that back. And he does nasty things in order to gain power so that he can get that back. And yes, he's extremely punished for it. And he's sent out. He's stripped of his power and he's sent out. And that's a reset point for him, where he suddenly goes, okay, time to build myself back up. I want to get better because now I have this purpose, which is Benedict. And now he's trying to do better and he's learning himself. And again, there's a side of me that believes that this king at the King Dragon Realm was partly influenced possibly by the man god, but he gets acceptance there. And he gets his chance to have this one thing that has accepted him. And now he fights for it. But then it ultimately goes in the idea that when he gets back to the kingdom, he's trying to do things that he believes is right, and he's building it up and everything like that. But he's feeling, again, a multitude of this same feeling. Now he has an entire kingdom looking to him as if he's a failure. Back here, it was people around him. It was Roxy. All these people. Nobody thinks I'm doing right. They all look at me like I'm a failure. And now here, he has the kingdom. Nobody likes his new rule. I tried. I put things into effect that would help us. I was trying to defend us. And yet still, look out this balcony. Everybody doesn't want me here. It's magnified. Back here, it was just Roxy. Back here, it was my father. Back here, it was my brothers. Over here, it was these people in the King Dragon Realm. Now, it's the entire kingdom of Sharon does not want me here. Even if Roxy wants to give me an excuse there, even if Zenoba is saying it's all right, they don't want me here. And that can easily, and that's what Randolph was saying. He's just waiting. It's coming. He's got to look out that window. Eventually, he's going to see. I think there's a side of that possibly could be that Randolph has a little bit of experience with that. That he's seen that Pax was seeing the world was coming down upon him, and he couldn't see himself go on. Which, again, is super heartbreaking when Zenoba is literally there trying to talk him down in some way. And even with his positivity, and it's such a, again, it's more impact because it's Zenoba in some way that you have seen so much of him not wanting to care about things around him, suddenly just wanting his brother, again, in a way, step down from that cliff, even though they didn't know he was going to go that far. And it's kind of interesting in this regard, because Rudius, of all people, you would think that he would see this coming. Rudius didn't see it coming. He says that he didn't see it coming. And you would think that Rudius, if anybody here, could see that was what he was doing. Like this was going to happen. I think it was mainly because he was so focused on the death god at that moment. But even before then, it does technically make you wonder why he didn't see it. But I think that why this is kind of okay to my mind is because what Rudius says. He failed. He should have seen this. He was too busy thinking about how evil Pax was. So I guess it technically does make sense that he didn't foresee it, because he was too busy worrying about that. He was too busy worrying about the Death God. He was too busy worrying about how evil Pax was. He was too busy worrying about what the Man God was doing. He was too busy with all this stuff to think about what was going on through Pax's mind. Because I think normally he would have said, he's just like me. But again, he does equate himself to Pax in a sense by saying, unlike him, I've been given positive reinforcement here. But I think that's kind of that disconnect that kind of happens where, yes, in my previous life, I might have felt that way, but I have sort of replaced it with this new life, which is a good thing for once. Anything else? I feel like I've forgotten like a million things, which we can cover in the next Mushoku Monday. Anyways, that's it. It's going to be a really long Mushoku Monday. Hope you guys enjoy this extremely long Mushoku Monday. I just felt like it all had to kind of come together. It just all kind of fit together. So hopefully it doesn't kill me, you know, editing it and everything. And I hope you guys enjoy it in the end. But greatly appreciate you guys for dropping by for the premiere. Hey, chat. Hope you guys did well. Hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday. I appreciate your guys' kind words, for your support, for being here, supporting me through this journey, through the whole thing. Make sure before you leave, make sure to hit that like button. It's really easy. It's the best way that you can support the channel if you can't in other ways. But that said, yes, I greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel monetarily through Patreon, tips, links, super thanks, all that stuff. It means a great deal to me. I really appreciate it. I cannot express enough the support that you guys have given me. But until the next Mushoku Monday, y'all take care. I've lost all the kings of the king. You have a stone of absorption, don't you? Have a stone of absorption, don't you? You have a stone of. You've got a stone of. But odds were very low. But odds of that was very. Do you remember what you told me back? Do you remember what you told me before we left? Do you remember what you told me before we left, Zenova? Do you remember what you told me before we left?